Chapter 1432. Shui Wuyin was unruffled as he stared back at him calmly. Yu Qianquan breathed in rapidly and said in a low voice, "Ninth uncle only asked this?" Shui Wuyin answered, "Yes. Lord Supreme Cloud only asked this one question. There are too few things in this world that can affect Lord Supreme Cloud. This question is already too much." Yu Qianquan closed his eyes. After a long while, he said, "This world was almost conquered by Ninth Uncle with his own strength. Didn't he ask anything about this world?" Shui Wuyin said coldly, "Your Majesty is right. Yutong has Supreme Cloud and the Nine Supremes help in bringing peace to the world, but how many people in this world still remember Supreme Cloud and the Nine Supremes? What's the point of remembering the heartless people and this world? Is it only to add to one's sadness? Is there anyone in this world who is grateful to Supreme Cloud now?" Yu Qianquan was silent for a moment before he said, "This is my fault." Shui Wuyin was speechless, remaining silent for a long while. Yu Qianquan said sadly, "Wuyin, one person's fortune or the fate of the world, which is more important?" Shui Wuyin said faintly, "How can this commoner comment on such a grand principle? This commoner is only here to complete a request. When I return, I will have to report to Lord Supreme Cloud about King Xiaoyao's well-being." Yu Qianquan was silent for a moment before he said, "I have always hoped that Ninth Uncle could come to Tianshan again, to lend me a hand. What I don't understand is, can one really be unsentimental after becoming an immortal?" Shui Wuyin did not budge an inch as he said, "When has Lord Supreme Cloud ever been unsentimental? He has people and things that he cares about, like his father, Lord Xiaoyao King." Yu Qianquan said, "Wuyin, you are forcing me." Shui Wuyin said, "Why would your Majesty say so? This commoner has made it clear again and again that I am only here on Lord Supreme Cloud's request to ask your Majesty a question. How is this an interrogation? May I ask your Majesty, how is King Xiaoyao?" Yu Qianquan said with difficulty, "King Xiaoyao, his whereabouts are unknown now. Why is his whereabouts unknown?" Shui Wuyin asked. A trace of anger flashed in Yu Qianquan's eyes as he said, "The country is in danger, and the mountains and rivers are in turmoil. I had no choice but to use all kinds of methods to lure Ninth Uncle down to the mortal world, but to no avail. In desperation, King Xiaoyao wanted to use the blood warning method to lure Ninth Uncle's soul to come to this world again." Shui Wuyin nodded and said, "In other words, the Freedom King is already dead?" Yu Qianquan said angrily, "King Xiaoyao, for the sake of the millions and millions of people in the world, for the great cause of the dynasty, for the future of the empire, for the future of the world, you sacrificed yourself for the sake of righteousness. Wuyin, you don't have to put it in such a bad way. This emperor knows that you're uncomfortable, and this emperor isn't feeling good either. However, the welfare of the people in this world is more important than the life and death of an individual. Anyone can tell which is more important." Shui Wuyin replied respectfully, "Yes, your Majesty is right. Your words are clear and logical, I understand them completely. However, His Majesty was mistaken about one thing. King Xiaoyao's life was his life alone. The world that your Majesty speaks of is only your Majesty's world, not the world of the people." Yu Qianquan's expression darkened slightly. Shui Wuyin's words were harsh, but he was not at the point of losing his temper. He even had a thought in his heart that the world was, of course, his world. Was there even a need to say it? "Of course, this emperor will convey your Majesty's reply to Lord Supreme Cloud." However, Lord Supreme Cloud asked if King Xiaoyao was well. I believe the answer he wants is only King Xiaoyao's well-being. If this emperor wishes to answer Lord Supreme Cloud, I will only answer whether King Xiaoyao is well or not. I won't answer anything else, such as the cause of his death." Shui Wuyin said, "Perhaps your Majesty doesn't know this, but this emperor and Lord Supreme Cloud's communication is limited in words. I can only send 6 words at a time. Just like what your Majesty has said, 6 words are obviously not enough to finish." 6 words? Yu Qianquan frowned when he heard the answer. Could it be that Ninth Uncle really didn't come down? If that's the case, how does Wuyin plan to report this? Of course I'll report it as it is. King Xiaoyao has passed away. That's not appropriate. Yu Qianquan said, since ninth uncle wants to know the news, why not tell him the truth? Shui Wuyin said, the truth? Would your majesty please state the content clearly? Yu Qianquan said, how about suddenly ambushed and died? Shui Wuyin was dumbfounded, speechless. I asked for 6 words and you've really given me 6 words. These 6 words made the content of what I wanted to say clear, and I even said almost everything. However, King Xiaoyao's cultivation base was profound and he had reached the pinnacle of this world where no one could challenge him. Furthermore, his status was revered and he held great authority. If he was suddenly ambushed and died, did this not mean that the empire of Yutong had encountered a great calamity? It was obvious that they were trying to lure Yunyang to come to Tianshan again. Why must your majesty make Lord Supreme Cloud step into the mortal realm again? Let's just say these 6 words. There's no need to really submit a memorial anyway. Lord Supreme Cloud is right in front of you. Not only these 6 words, he had heard everything that was said during this exchange without missing a single word. An unprecedented crisis is looming over this land. Yu Qianquan sighed with melancholy. The late emperor was ambushed and poisoned. He was bedridden for several years and passed the throne to me. Now, I'm being threatened as well, my life is at stake. The country is in danger, the mountains and rivers are crumbling and we're in a precarious situation. Yutong is trying its best to save itself, but it's still not a match for the supernatural forces. If ninth uncle doesn't come, this world. King Xiaoyao died for the country, for the greater good and for the future of the world. Yu Qianquan heaved a long sigh. Shui Wuyin said, this lowly one understands. If your majesty has no other instructions, I shall take my leave now. Yu Qianquan said, Wuyin, if ninth uncle asks, you must explain my difficulties. Comparing my safety to the country and the world, Shui Wuyin could not hold it in any longer. He sneered and said, even if your majesty doesn't say it, this lowly one understands the crux of the matter. I've already made it clear to your majesty, but there's only one thing that needs to be clarified. As the saying goes, the safety of an individual is more important than the billions of people in the world. Your majesty has made it clear many times and everyone knows this. Then, this lowly one would like to ask, your majesty is the son of supreme earth and supreme water. Of course, you have to call these 2 seniors father and mother. However, I wonder if your majesty can also call the billions of people in this world father and mother? Insolence. A roar that sounded like muffled thunder suddenly resounded. Yu Qianquan's face suddenly turned gloomy, and it seemed as if it was about to drip water. Shui Wuyin was unfazed as he said, this lowly one is merely asking for the truth. How is it rude to speak my mind? At least, this is how Lord King Xiaoyao is to Lord Supreme Cloud. He bowed lightly and said, this lowly one shall take his leave. Yu Qianquan's face darkened as he watched Shui Wuyin walk out. Just as Shui Wuyin was about to reach the door, he suddenly spoke again, Wuyin, this emperor's cordiality and sincerity, are you really not going to consider staying behind to help this emperor? He said sincerely, the golden age is upon us. I need a martial world controller, a ruler of the night. Wuyin, just a nod and you'll be the sovereign of the night. Shui Wuyin could not help but admire this sovereign's magnanimity. He had already offended him to this extent, but the latter still wanted to recruit him. Furthermore, he could even make such a promise. Your Majesty, aren't you angry that this lowly one has offended you? My wrath cannot extinguish your talents. Yu Qianquan took 2 steps forward with his hands behind his back. Wuyin, my actions may have been heartless, but I don't regret them. The world's domination is in my hands, and I need absolute control. I know I'm lacking in virtue, but for the world's domination, I have no choice but to do so. I've done it before, and I'll do it in the future. I only ask for an everlasting achievement, an unparalleled glory as an emperor. And on this basis, I can give you as much scope as you have the ability to display it. As long as it's not a rebellion, I'll let everyone's talents be fully utilized. Even if this person curses me behind my back, I want to use his talents, and not his mouth. I'm heartless, but it's because I'm heartless that I'm impartial to each and every official. Wuyin, stay. Shui Wuyin paused at the entrance of the hall. After a long moment of silence, he said faintly, Your Majesty, perhaps you don't know this, but this lowly one was loyal to Lord Supreme Wind back then. We're sworn brothers, brothers of life and death. This lowly one doesn't know the rest of the 9 Supremes, including Lord Supreme Cloud. After Lord Supreme Wind passed away, Lord Supreme Cloud invited me again and again. Coincidentally, both of us have the same wish, which is to avenge Lord Supreme Wind. That's why we're walking the same path, with no regrets. To put it bluntly, Lord Supreme Cloud and I call each other brothers and we entrust our lives to each other. This lowly one only knows these 2 brothers among the 9 Supremes. The rest of them are not worth mentioning. His voice was tinged with pride. I don't know if Your Majesty believes it or not, but if I, Shui Wuyin, wanted to be rich and powerful in the officialdom, I could have achieved my wish a dozen years ago. Even if I couldn't rule the world, it wouldn't be difficult for me to get a high position. I, Shui Wuyin, consider myself a lowly one, a commoner. However, Your Majesty, please don't forget that this lowly one is the brother of Supreme Wind and Supreme Cloud, and can also be considered the brother of Supreme Earth and Supreme Water. If this lowly one is fortunate enough to see Your Majesty again, I hope that Your Majesty will address me as uncle. Finishing his words, he strode away. Shui Wuyin could no longer control his temper and uttered the last part in anger. Yu Qinkuan had never called Yun Xiaoyao granduncle since the beginning. Even when he was ambushed and died, he had only addressed him as King Xiaoyao. He is King Xiaoyao and you are the emperor. Does that mean that you are still the senior? Talking about righteousness and sacrifice, your father will talk about human relations and seniority with you. I admire your ability and your breadth of mind, but I look down on your character. You are an emperor, but you are only an emperor. You are no longer human. But I am still human. Shui Wuyin left swiftly, an evaluation forming in his heart. Yu Qinkuan was more than enough to be an emperor of a generation. On the surface, he was magnanimous, approachable, and courteous. But in reality, he was cold and indifferent. He was a hypocrite. Just like what he had said, a heartless man. Normally, an emperor could give up and sacrifice everything for his empire, but he would still want to possess some other things, such as loyalty, kinship, love, and all other beautiful things. What they lost could be called sacrifice, it could be called giving. Such sacrifice and giving were noble, but they were also forced. For example, the empire of Yutong's previous emperor, Yu Qinkuan's grandfather, Yu Peiza, had endured humiliation for the sake of Yutong. He had even sacrificed his own life to protect the lives of his old officials. This was what it meant to be a sacrifice, this was the embodiment of camaraderie. However, Yu Qinkuan was different. He only had his empire and his imperial power in his eyes. Other than these, he could give up anything else, including kinship, love, and everything else. Yes, it was abandonment. In the eyes of an emperor like Yu Qinkuan, as long as the throne and the empire were still there, it did not matter what he had to give up. He would not feel uneasy, he would not feel heartache, and he would not be reluctant to let go. In Yu Peiza's eyes, a minister needed to be capable, virtuous, and loyal. If this minister committed a grave mistake, even if it was a capital offense, he would find a way to let him off the hook and let him live. After all, this official had contributed to Yutong for a significant portion of his life. He would be rewarded for his contributions and punished for his crimes, but there was still room for mercy. In Yu Qinkuan's eyes, an official only needed to be capable. It did not matter whether his character was good or bad. Once an official had committed a grave mistake, he would execute him without hesitation. He would not hesitate in the slightest just because this minister had once made great contributions to the empire. You've done a great deed, I'll reward you handsomely. You've committed a grave mistake, I'll punish you heavily. There was no such thing as atoning for a crime with a great deed. In short, he was a person without compassion. This was a fundamental difference, a difference in essence. If Shui Wuyin could see this, so could Yun Yang. Shui Wuyin did not follow anyone on his way back. It seemed like this selfish emperor had not given up on his intention to recruit Shui Wuyin. He was very clear that even though he had obtained the name list, it was still impossible for him to command and control these people. Unless he killed all of them. However, it was obviously impossible to kill all of them. As long as one of these people died, the rest would vanish from this world in an instant. This was the power of the Nine Heavens dictum. It was because of this reason that he urgently needed Shui Wuyin to continue controlling the Nine Supreme's forces. It was only until the day when he had nurtured another person who could replace Shui Wuyin that he would dispose of Shui Wuyin mercilessly. Before that, no matter what Shui Wuyin's attitude was, he would keep him around. He would even pretend to be lofty, approachable, and harmless. Yu Qinkuan, who was in the palace, was reflecting as well. I'm very curious. When Shui Wuyin first came in, during the initial interaction, I could clearly feel that he admired me. What was it that made him suddenly change this admiration into another emotion? Resentment, even anger. Yu Qinkuan thought carefully about every word he had said. Grey fog emerged and said, "Indeed, there was a problem with what your majesty said later, but this old man didn't know which one it was. Up until the words Wuyin, I believe you, stay and help me." Shui Wuyin's admiration was still there. However, from this sentence onwards, Shui Wuyin changed the topic and his attitude took a sudden turn for the worse, out of control. Yu Qinkuan recalled, "Is there a problem with this sentence?" Grey fog was perplexed as well. Logically speaking, when a monarch or an emperor said this to his subjects, what he should get the most was the loyalty and wholehearted support from them. But what about Shui Wuyin? Just because he felt that he was the brother of Supreme Wind and Cloud, he deserved the honor of being an emperor's elder? I think I know. A cold glint flashed across Yu Qinkuan's eyes. What? Grey fog was still puzzled. Yu Qinkuan did not explain further but changed the topic. "Elder Qiao, what do you think Shui Wuyin is here today? Has my ninth uncle returned or not?" Grey fog was equally hesitant about this question. It was difficult to answer. Before Shui Wuyin's arrival, he was almost certain that Supreme Cloud was coming to Tianshan again. Now, however, after Shui Wuyin's arrival, the situation that should have been clear was abnormally shrouded in confusion once again. Especially those 6 words of agreement. It was too harsh. If ninth uncle really comes again, what do you plan to do? Do you have a plan? Yu Qinkuan frowned. Grey mist smiled faintly. Your Majesty, you've overestimated us, or perhaps you've underestimated your ninth uncle. When Supreme Cloud was in the continent, he was powerful enough to uproot the school of Kismet State, but he wasn't unshakable. With my 10,000 years of cultivation, it's still up in the air who will emerge victorious. But now, even if my ability far surpasses the so-called pinnacle of this world and my soul form is almost invulnerable. Your ninth uncle is someone who has ascended to immortality after all. If Lord Supreme Cloud really comes, I only have less than 5% chance of killing him. The remaining 95% chance is that I'll be killed by him. Neither of us will be injured, nor will we be wary of each other. Grey fog sighed. He had thought about this countless times, so he was not lying. That was what he thought. Although his confidence was pitifully small, he still had that little bit of confidence. Yu Qinkuan frowned. King Xiaoyao is really dead? Absolutely, Grey Fog replied. Lin Yunlong and the rest have been dealt with as well. Yu Qinkuan heaved a sigh of relief, his gaze complicated. Grey Fog asked, Your Majesty, do you regret it? Yu Qinkuan was silent for a long time before he said, I've just thrown away the bow after the birds have been killed. There's nothing that can't be sacrificed for the sake of world domination. Some human kinship has only disturbed the source of one's state of mind. What I'm looking forward to now is the battle between you and Ninth Uncle. Grey Fog said solemnly, "This old man will give his all in this battle." Yu Qianquan heaved a long sigh and said, "If you win, what will you do?" "Nothing much. With Supreme Cloud gone, the world will be plunged into chaos once more. I'll continue to stand by your Majesty's side and help you conquer the world once more. My ability far surpasses the 9 Supremes of the past. Your Majesty won't doubt this, will you?" Yu Qianquan nodded slowly. "What if you fail?" "If this old man fails, of course, I'll be annihilated by Lord Supreme Cloud." Grey Fog chuckled bitterly. "What else would I want to do? I don't believe you." With old Qin's foresight, how could he not have a backup plan? "That's why I'll be looking forward to your next appearance." Yu Qianquan smiled faintly. "I just don't know if my 9th uncle will really descend to the mortal realm and what level his ability has reached. Actually, it's very easy to test whether Supreme Cloud has descended or not," Grey Fog said. "As long as you drag Mei Wenjian to the execution ground to be beheaded, we'll know whether Supreme Cloud has come or not." "Not bad, that's a good idea." Yu Qianquan seemed to be deep in thought. After Yun Xiaoyao left the residence, Lao Mei was temporarily immobilized by Yun Xiaoyao. However, it was also during this interval that Yu Qianquan brought him to the palace and imprisoned him. From being temporarily immobilized, he was completely immobilized. To Yu Qianquan, sacrificing Lao Mei. A mere butler of the prince's mansion was nothing. If Supreme Cloud returned, he would naturally rescue him. However, if Supreme Cloud did not return, then Lao Mei's death was nothing. Grey Fog felt a little sorry for Yu Qianquan. "Your Majesty, you're really decisive. This old man has lived in this world for tens of thousands of years and experienced many dynasties, but there are few who are as decisive as your Majesty. If your 9th uncle really returns, it's hard to imagine what he'll do to you." Yu Qianquan said thoughtfully, "At most, he'll just beat me up, or perhaps there will be other punishments. But no matter what, 9th uncle won't kill me. I'm very sure of this." Grey Fog chuckled coldly. "That might not be the case." Yu Qianquan said faintly, "I may be a little ruthless, but since I've been in charge, the wealth of the world has quadrupled in these few years. The people have also recovered from the chaos of war, and the population has even increased compared to before the war. Now, everyone in the world has food to eat and clothes to wear. Those who are slightly better off will have a scholar among them, they won't be completely illiterate. These are things that the previous emperors have not been able to achieve." Yu Qianquan said, "I know that I may have failed as a person, but I think that I'm still qualified to be an emperor. Now that the golden age is coming, and I'm only a teenager, I have a lot of time to push this country to the peak of prosperity. In this country, I can achieve unprecedented achievements, and I can build a great dynasty that no one has ever seen before. For all of this, even if I have to give up something, sacrifice something, or use some means, it will all be worth it. I just need the right to speak. 9th uncle will understand me. And he will support me." Yu Qianquan's voice was fanatical, but his eyes were calm. He understood all of his plans, and his life was already running wildly on the route of this plan. It was impossible to stop. Grey Fog was a little speechless. Looking at Yu Qianquan, who was full of confidence, even Grey Fog, a 10,000-year-old ghost, had to admit that this was indeed an unprecedented peerless emperor. The achievements he had just mentioned were not false. And this was only the beginning of his reign. If this continued, the world would definitely become a better place. This was something that even Grey Fog figure could not deny. However, the price to obtain all of this was the absolute ruthlessness of an emperor. Just as he had said, all he wanted was merit. "Your Majesty, perhaps, you don't regret it now, but when you grow old, you will definitely have regrets." Yu Qianquan closed his eyes and said lightly, "Who can live without regrets?" Feng Lingtian said, this chapter was finished in the afternoon, and he had been revising it. When he had just finished writing, there were only about 4,000 words, but he felt that he had not written it well enough. So he added and polished it, and in the end, he had actually written more than 6,000 words. But he still felt that it was not enough. But there was not enough time. He would publish it first for everyone to comment. Chapter 1433. After they returned, Yunyang and Shui Wuyin faced each other in silence for a long time. Shui Wuyin stared at Yunyang for a long time. Shui Wuyin had always known that Yunyang was an intelligent person. He himself was a resourceful person. However, he had no idea what decision Yunyang would make this time. Yunyang had been attached to Shui Wuyin's body, listening to the entire process. He had seen every word that Yu Qiankuan had said and done. There was no need for both of them to discuss anything further as they had already come to a conclusion. This is truly hilarious. Yunyang sneered, finally speaking in a complicated tone. Shui Wuyin chuckled but still did not comment. Yunyang then sighed deeply and said softly, just like what he said, I can't kill him. His birth, his parents, are his trump card to protect himself. I can't do anything about it. This is what my eldest brother didn't get back then. Eldest brother and fourth sister have suffered too much. There's also the credit that no one knows about. Now, all of this is what I deserve as their son. But I still feel sad. It's an exhaustion that seeps deep into my bones. It's not worth it. Yunyang smirked coldly and said, such a sorrowful thing is right before my eyes. A tragedy that has long been twisted and made use of a great sentiment has fallen before me. I have to face it. It's just a pity and regret. Shui Wuyin smiled faintly. Boss, I understand what you're saying. If this child were Brother Feng's son, I'm afraid I would feel the same as you. However, boss, you can't deny that perhaps His Majesty the old Emperor would like to see an heir like this. To him, this situation may not be pleasant, but he won't necessarily be disappointed either. After all, to an emperor, someone like Yu Qiankuan is perfect, even exceeding the old emperor's expectations for the empire's heir. Boss, you want him to be a loyal and affectionate emperor, but that may not be good. Yunyang chuckled and said bitterly, it's a pity that we don't know what the old emperor is thinking anymore. Perhaps what you said makes sense, but I still feel sad and heartache. It's not about that child, but about eldest brother and fourth sister. Yunyang paused and said, today's meeting, in addition to the confession of the man in black soul, is enough to connect the dots between the beginning and the end of this period of time. Most probably, the founders of the school of Kismet State were unwilling to see their 10,000 years of planning go down the drain. After confirming that I've ascended to the upper realm, they seized the opportunity to take control of the palace. They knew very well that the old emperor wasn't an easy character to deal with. He was an old emperor who had been immersed in scheming his entire life. How could he be manipulated and controlled by them? So the moment they took control of the royal family, they poisoned the old emperor. Although the poison didn't affect the emperor's reputation, he could still linger on with his last breath, but he no longer had the energy to pay attention to national affairs. If this went on, Yutang's power was bound to decline. Unexpectedly, the old emperor was a decisive man, a man who could be cruel to himself. Knowing that he was poisoned and that his days were numbered, knowing that the school of Kismet State's methods were beyond the realm of this world's ability and no one could deal with them, he painstakingly came up with a countermeasure to allow Yu Qiankuan to ascend to the throne of the crown prince and exercise the power of regent. On the surface, he looked like he was trapped by the poison, unable to do anything. He was only cooperating with the school of Kismet State's actions and lingering on with his last breath, but in reality, he had many actions to protect the old officials and leave them for the future. The school of Kismet State wanted to lure me down and kill me, but the old emperor hoped that I would come down to clean up the mess. From this point, both parties had the same goal. So, the destruction of the worshippers and the tainting of the 9 supremes went smoothly. It was also the result of both parties' compromise. No, the school of Kismet State might be happy to have so many old officials leave Yutang. If they want to recreate a chaotic world and leave a backup plan for themselves, there must only be one voice in the imperial court. Also, if they can't destroy me, they can only choose to lie low for now, but the pace of recreating a chaotic world won't stop. Their ultimate goal is to unify the world and obtain providence. If Yutong is always filled with talents and the continent's famous officials and generals are gathered in one hall, even if there's any chaos, it'll be nothing more than a flip of the hand. Therefore, it's inevitable that the old officials will no longer return to the imperial court. If these people aren't destroyed, the chaotic world will only be a joke. Even if a pig sits on the throne, as long as he doesn't touch these capable officials, these people will be able to protect this empire like an iron bucket, much less a capable emperor. Therefore, these people must die. Just because of this, the old emperor has made his arrangements. He's dictated everything, no longer listening to anyone's opinions and suggestions, intentionally ignoring everyone's dissatisfaction and grievances. The resignation of the Shangguan family of generals is only a start. The chilling act of deposing the Shangguan family of generals, who have shed their blood for Yutong, can only be carried out smoothly. Perhaps old Mistress Shangguan's resignation was instigated by the old emperor. This is a start. If the Shangguan family of generals is like this, what about the others? I think the old emperor must have been doing other things during that period of time. Not everyone can be chilled. Only those who think they've made great contributions to the country can feel such a chill. Those who sit in their positions without doing anything will never feel chilled. Therefore, the Shangguan family of generals' resignation triggered a chain reaction. Qiu Jianhan and the others retreated at the beginning only to see the emperor's reaction. However, the emperor didn't say anything and approved the memorial immediately. They had no choice but to leave. The old emperor used this method to save these officials who were supposed to be killed by the school of Kismet state. From the imperial court, he retreated to the martial world. As for the school of Kismet state, the reason they didn't adopt a targeted strategy to hunt down the old officials who had left the imperial court was because they were afraid that the old emperor would fight to the death. Once the current situation was reversed, the repercussions would only be longer. Whether the old officials existed or not was a matter of time to them. That's why the old emperor's arrangements for the old officials were so smooth. The school of Kismet state didn't know that all of this was a bet. If I could come back in time, the old officials who had left the imperial court would return immediately and Yutong's stability could be ensured. Otherwise, everything would turn to dust. What more could I say? I have to say that the old emperor's initial intention was good. It's a pity that this plan was entrusted to the wrong person. Shui Wuyin said with a smile, "That's right. The old emperor's plan was already the best solution when he had no other choice. If Yu Qinkuan had gone according to his plan, Yutong would still be Yutong, with a long life to come. However, no matter how the old emperor calculated, he still neglected one thing: Yu Qinkuan was still the emperor. He had his own ambitions and plans. The human heart was treacherous. Even if he was close to his grandson, he still couldn't resist the desire for power in the face of the nation's crisis. Yu Qinkuan went with the flow and swept those old officials out of the imperial court according to the old emperor's plan, but he didn't intend to summon them back. One of them came back and the other didn't. That was the fundamental change. For an emperor, the previous subordinates and the previous empire are all other people's. Even if it is passed down from the ancestors, it is not his own. Only the things that he controls, the lands that he controls, are truly his own. Only then will there be no restraints, and only then can he do as he pleases. With these old officials in the imperial court, he'll always be a young emperor. Besides, he has to give face to these people. Unknowingly, there will be too many restraints on what he wants to do. Now that these people are gone, he's the emperor. The word young has been removed. That's why he took advantage of the situation and went with the flow, causing the situation to evolve to the state it is today. He's even working with the school of Kismet state now, wanting to build a millennium-long hegemony of his own, a legend of an emperor. Shui Wuin's analysis of Yu Qinkuan's mentality was meticulous and meticulous. I think he must have used some way to confirm that the school of Kismet state can only obtain fortune through him. In that case, he's not in danger. Even if you come, my lord, with Supreme Earth and Supreme Water's relationship, even if you're disappointed, you won't kill him. That's why he can attack and defend at will. No matter who wins or loses, he'll be the victor. He's getting what he wants. Let me put it this way. Up until now, Yu Qianquan is destined to win. No matter how things develop and evolve in the future, Yu Qianquan will be the final and true victor. Even if Lord Supreme Cloud and the School of Kismet State destroy this heaven and earth, this world will still belong to him. He keeps saying that it's for the sake of the country, and that his personal safety is insignificant compared to the world. But in his heart, the world belongs to him, and he can overturn it and destroy it with a single thought. Based on this standpoint, anyone can sacrifice themselves for the country. It's only a process. As long as he's alive and still sitting in this position, everything else doesn't matter. The conversation in the palace continued, as did Yun Yang's. Yun Yang had finally heard the words as well. Push Plum Wenjian out for execution, lure Supreme Cloud out. Crack. Yun Yang clenched the armrest of the armchair he was sitting on and crushed it into pieces. The conversation in the palace continued. When the gray fog was about to leave, Yu Qianquan said faintly, Elder Qin, from tomorrow onwards, Zheng Yuanquan doesn't have to teach me anymore. The gray fog asked, Does your Majesty find that old man a little annoying? Yu Qianquan replied faintly, I wouldn't call it annoying. I just feel that Elder Qin can already teach me. Why do I need to use another identity? He continued, What's more, I'm used to having Elder Qin by my side. It makes me even more cautious. Coming with that head, it makes me feel like I'm being treated like a fool. The gray fog chuckled dryly. As your Majesty wishes. So your Majesty is perceptive enough to know that Zheng Yuanquan is a part of this old man's soul. Yu Qianquan said coldly, How could a reputable scholar of virtue and virtue teach such a heartless way of emperor? What's more, a corresponding incident happened here right after he started teaching, as if to specifically verify the teaching results. If it's a coincidence, once is already too many. How could it not be clear after a few times? The gray fog chuckled bitterly, a hint of dread appearing in his eyes as he said, Your Majesty, this old man guarantees that as long as this old man's wish is fulfilled, I'll leave immediately. The School of Kismet State will be completely under your Majesty's control, becoming a sharp sword under your Majesty's command. Heavens shall bear witness and dare not go against the vow. The thunderclap came crashing down, signaling the vow's establishment. Yu Qianquan's expression remained unchanged as he said faintly, The School of Kismet State is in the world that I rule. It's mine to begin with. When this ends, no matter who wins or loses, your Majesty will be undefeatable. However, the subsequent policies will surely be different, won't they? The gray fog said after a pause. Elder Qin, just say what you want to say, Yu Qianquan said indifferently. If you wish for long-term peace, those who possess supreme arts and can wreak havoc in the world, your Majesty must not be allowed to live. It's never just a saying that heroes break the law with their martial arts, the gray fog reminded him. I know. A cold glint flashed across Yu Qianquan's eyes as he said faintly, However, everything can only be decided after my ninth uncle has left. It's meaningless to even talk about it now. The gray fog was silent for a moment before he said, So your Majesty has never watched the battle between this old man and Supreme Cloud? Yu Qianquan said indifferently, Do you think you'll win, Elder Qin? The gray fog kept quiet and said, How can this old man be satisfied if I don't fight? I've lived for 10,000 years and yet I'm not as good as a brat in his early 20s. Who can tolerate that? Yu Qianquan's eyes were filled with mockery. To him, this old fart was only a tool that had coincidentally appeared to help him seize power at the right time. Now, this old fart's usefulness had actually been exhausted. If he died, so be it. However, the legacy of the School of Kismet State would form an exclusive force for him in the future. It would be useful for spying on intelligence and monitoring the officials. In addition, it would be even better if he could take over all the forces belonging to the Nine Heavens Dictum. The forces of the martial world would also be under his control. Only then would he be able to truly rule over the world. As for the old fart before him, he must not be allowed to live. So what if he had sworn an oath to heaven? It was better to destroy an existence that was too powerful as soon as possible. It would be best if ninth uncle could kill him. If he can't, I'll feign civility for a while longer. The other has already sworn an oath to heaven and is harmless to me. I'll always be in an invincible position. This old fart has mentioned again and again about living for 10,000 years. If I really manage to escape death this time, I might as well acknowledge him as the imperial preceptor and keep the art of immortality. Being an emperor of immortality is not a bad idea. But all this, I'll have to wait for you and ninth uncle to fight before I can come to a conclusion. The gray fog was still speaking. Supreme Cloud is undoubtedly powerful, a legend of a generation. His reputation is not undeserved, but it's only been a few years since he ascended. Even if he's improved, it's limited. According to the legends of Supreme Cloud back then, he's still lacking compared to me. Supreme Cloud's most famous technique of transforming into the wind and clouds, leaving no trace behind. This old man has been immersed in this art for 10,000 years. Even if Supreme Cloud is a prodigy, how far can he cultivate? It's just that he hasn't met an opponent that can restrain him in the past. He smiled confidently and said, "Your Majesty, aren't you a little too confident in your ninth uncle?" A mocking smirk hung at the corners of Yu Qinkuan's lips. I look forward to this grand event of the century, an earth-shattering battle. On the other side, Yun Yang sighed once more. He had completely given up. It turned out that Yu Qinkuan was well aware of the scholar Jing Yuanquan. If the school of Kismet State's old fart was said to be the mastermind behind everything that was happening now, it would be more accurate to say that Yu Qinkuan was the real mastermind. At the very least, if it was only the old fart who was pushing for it, it would not be so fast. The heart of an emperor is so strange. Yin Yang sighed with his head held high. Could it be that after a person becomes an emperor, such a drastic change would occur? There was a stern look on his face as he called out, "Wuyin." Shui Wuyin stood up immediately. This young brother is here. He knew that Yun Yang must have made an important decision for him to speak in such a tone. You know what I'm thinking. I definitely can't kill Yu Qinkuan, but I don't want the people I care about to end up in a bad situation. Yin Yang said in a low voice, therefore, we need to build our own force that's independent of Yutong. We also need to have the capability to intimidate the entire continent. A glint flashed across Shui Wuyin's eyes. He could not be sure if Yun Yang was hinting at him. However, he did not say anything, taking it as a hint from Yun Yang. If he were to say it out loud and Yun Yang denied it, it would be difficult to proceed. Shui Wuyin lowered his head in silence and said, "Don't worry, boss. It's not difficult. Let's call it the School of Cloud then." Yin Yang said faintly, "I'll provide you with the resources related to this matter. After I leave, you'll be in charge of everything else. I only want the results, not the process." "Yes," replied Shui Wuyin. "You should know what I care about." "Of course, I do. Use your brain more," Yin Yang said. Shui Wuyin understood what he was referring to and said, "I will." However, some of the elderly might not be able to hold on much longer. Besides, this matter itself is already a huge blow to them. When things become clear and they know that the late emperor's painstaking plan has been tampered with, they'll only be even more unable to take it. Yin Yang nodded. "This is a problem, but I'll settle everything before I leave." He stood up and said, "Now that things are clear, there's no more hesitation. It's a piece of cake for me to resolve this matter. After I'm done with this, I'll return to the bound of universe. Now that I've returned to Tianxian, it's a pity that things remain the same but people have changed," Yin Yang said tiredly. However, there was a sense of enlightenment in his heart, a sense of relief. He could finally let go of his worries in this world. From then on, his state of mind was clear. It turned out that what he missed the most and couldn't let go of was this place. Now, he could finally let it go. After settling this matter and finding Yun Xiaoyao, he would leave a sea of resources to build a safe force. After settling Qiu Jianhan, the Shengguan family of generals and the rest, there would be nothing else worth worrying about. Including Yu Qinkuan. They would never enter his heart again. With Shui Wuyin around, Yu Qinkuan could be kept in check. Once the thought came to him, he felt a sudden sense of relief. His cultivation base that had already reached its peak, the barrier of the Saint Realm, had disappeared by more than half. Phew, Yun Yang closed his eyes, feeling sentimental. My life, the overall path has been too smooth. However, things in this world don't go as one wishes. Even when one becomes a god or a saint, how can there be no regrets? This is my last journey in Yutong. That's it. How could Shui Wuyin not understand that Yun Yang was physically and mentally exhausted from extreme disappointment? He nodded and said, I understand. Yun Yang sighed. From the standpoint of an emperor, perhaps it's not wrong, but from my standpoint, I can't accept it, I can't accept it. Let this matter be as it is. I can only say that Yutong has produced a relatively qualified emperor, but to me, it's like I've raised a rebellious disciple. My teachings are such a failure. The chill in his heart was indescribable. Let's wait and see. The moment this bastard pushes Lao Mei out to be executed will be the moment everything ends. To Yun Yang, finding the gray fog, which was old Qin himself, was the end of the show. As long as he could capture old Qin, Yun Yang had countless ways to make him summon his clones obediently. Yun Yang had endless confidence in this. Even refining it into a soul puppet would be as easy as lifting a finger. However, the one who disappointed him the most was Yu Qinkuan. There was regret in his heart, but he had no regrets. Tomorrow's battle will settle the karma. That's right. How can everything go according to one's wishes? I just want to have a clear conscience. This is life. After thinking for a long time, he decided to stop writing. It would be a taboo if he started writing again. Awkward, Amp, GT. Chapter 1434. On this day, it was almost noon. Lao Mei's expression was as calm as still water, unruffled as he strode out of the room. Lao Mei was imprisoned in a secret chamber in the palace, not a prison cell, and he was not shackled. Someone came to put the shackles on Lao Mei. Lao Mei's expression was still indifferent, there was nothing strange in his eyes as he allowed the person to do as he pleased. The person then led him to a carriage. The carriage moved slowly and left the palace. Lao Mei closed his eyes in the carriage, his previous composure gone. The scene of the young Emperor Yu Qinkuan coming to speak to him last night flashed before his eyes. Lao Mei, who had prided himself on knowing everything, could not help but smile mockingly. Bao, greets Grandfather Mei. I don't deserve it. You're too kind, Grandfather Mei. Bao, is here to bid farewell to you. Bid farewell? Have I reached the end of my lifespan? Grandfather Mei, you're thinking too much. This is a plan. It's like this, Grandfather Mei, I have no other choice. This is the situation now. If we don't adapt soon, the world will be in turmoil again and chaos will return at any moment. Without Ninth Uncle's reappearance, I have no way to deal with it. Right now, the lives of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court are in someone else's hands. The situation is as bad as it is now. If there's no hope of Ninth Uncle's reappearance, then we can only watch helplessly as the world is plunged into chaos again. Grandfather Mei, you've been through this, you should know that the world has only been peaceful for a few years. There are many countries that have the intention of restoring the throne, and there are many ambitious people who want to replace me. One wrong move and the people will suffer and the people will fall. However, as long as Ninth Uncle returns to this world, he can conquer the world and Tianxian with a single battle. Grandfather Mei, I have no choice but to do this. Please understand Bao's love for the people. At the end of the day, this old man's life is the straw that draws Lord Supreme Cloud back, a bet? If I had a choice, why would I do something that would hurt my own family and delight my enemy? If Ninth Uncle had returned, he would have saved Grandpa May immediately. However, if I didn't do this, I wouldn't have been able to deal with the current situation. Sigh, Grandpa May, how could I not know that this is the last time I'll see you after I've made my decision? Ninth Uncle has arrived and saved you, but how could he possibly forgive me? He would naturally take you far away. This is indeed the last time I'll see you. Lord Supreme Cloud has come again and saved this old man, never to return to Yutong. While this is the last time I'll see you, if Lord Supreme Cloud doesn't come and this old man dies, it will also be the last time I'll see you, won't it? Grandfather May, if Ninth Uncle doesn't come, then it's fate. Everyone's fate is as such. No one is lucky. You're just a step ahead. If you didn't go to such extremes, how could you have triggered the response from the other world? Lao Mei laughed heartily. Well said. Those who want to achieve great things don't bother with trifles. My execution is just a little trick. Whether or not I can fulfill my long-cherished wish, today will be the last time I see you, kid. Either we go to the ends of the earth or the netherworld. Please understand Grandfather May. This old man is about to die. You want me to understand you? Whether Grandfather May understands or not, still wants to see Grandfather May one last time. Yu Qinkuan's face was filled with melancholy. Grandfather May, you're the only one left of my past. Lao Mei lifted his head abruptly. Only one left? I'm the only one left of those who once escorted and protected you? They've left, they won't be coming back anymore. Yu Qinkuan said sadly, ever since I ascended the throne as emperor, Bai Shue and Fang Mafei have brought those people away. Lao Mei frowned and sneered, this old man doesn't believe it. Yu Qinkuan sighed. It's true, Lao Mei snorted and said, if Bai Shue and Fang Mafei wanted to leave, why wouldn't they tell me? Both of them vanished without a word. If it wasn't for your majesty, who else could have erased all the traces? Yu Qinkuan stood up. Grandfather May, we shall not meet again after today's farewell. Please, take care. Lao Mei laughed out loud again. Silence ensued. Even now, as he sat in the carriage heading to the execution ground, Lao Mei could not help but chuckle inwardly when he recalled their meeting yesterday. How hypocritical, how pretentious. You've ordered me to be executed and beheaded in public, yet you've told me to take care of myself. Sitting in the carriage, Lao Mei chuckled coldly. If Lord Supreme Cloud had known that you'd become like this, I wonder if he would have brought you back to Yutong. I've always heard that the Imperial Palace is the biggest dye vat in the world. Today, I've finally witnessed that it's true. Even a pure heart can't withstand the corrosion of this dye vat. Ha ha ha. Lao Mei sneered as if there was no one else around him on the way to the execution ground. At this moment, the execution ground was already crowded with people. Mei Wenjian, the steward of the residence of King Yun, had been beheaded. Mei Wenjian had colluded with evil to frame King Yun, causing the latter's whereabouts to be unknown and his fate unknown. His crimes were heinous and he was to be executed at noon. Countless people heard the news and flocked over to watch the execution. An evil slave betrayed his master, he should be killed and his bones crushed. It's unforgivable. He's wicked and insane. One look at his ugly face and you can tell he's not a good person. Kill him. Kill him. The echoing voices of the crowd grew louder and louder. Lao Mei, who was tied up, had his eyes closed as he stood upright on the execution platform. He did not have to open his eyes to confirm, for he could sense that the sun in the sky was slowly moving towards noon with his warrior's sense of touch. It was already noon. There were still 3/4 of time left before the execution. Perhaps, this would be the last 3/4 of time he had left in this world. Around him, there was a sea of people, their voices boisterous. It was as if everyone was filled with righteous indignation, shouting at the top of their lungs to denounce him for betraying His Highness and framing him as an unjust person. Everyone seemed to be overwhelmed with grief and indignation. This was what it meant to be condemned by the masses. However, Lao Mei did not feel sad, nor did he feel fear. Instead, he only wanted to laugh out loud. Do you know who King Yun is? Do you know King Yun? Do you know the cause and effect of all this? Imperial edict? Ha ha ha, King Yun, that's my eldest brother. My eldest brother and I have been risking our lives together since we were young, roaming the world, leading thousands of soldiers and killing our enemies in a flash. This old man has gone through the brink of death for my eldest brother. My eldest brother was willing to sacrifice his life for me. In the midst of thousands of soldiers and horses, we charged back and forth, in front of Yutong's gates, we fought a bloody battle. Now, I've actually become a traitor and murderer who betrayed my eldest brother. How laughable. How pathetic. Do you know that if my eldest brother wanted me dead, he wouldn't even need to say a word, just a glance would suffice. On the other hand, if I wanted my eldest brother's life, he would definitely tie himself up and pass the saber to me. If I couldn't bear to do it myself, he would do it himself, cutting off his head and sending it to me. This is the bond between us brothers. What do you all know? Lao Mei stood on the execution platform, suddenly feeling more and more disheartened. The bloody battle, the narrow escape, everything that had happened, the hundreds of scars on his body, what was it for? What was it for? Everyone was responsible for the rise and fall of the world. The sighing of the living, the suffering of the people. Ha 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 ha. Lao Mei closed his eyes and suddenly laughed at the sky, his laughter growing louder. Ha 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 ha, it's 1:15 p.m. A loud shout rang out. The crowd fell silent. An arrow of command was tossed down from above, followed by an icy command, behead. It was only one word. The executioner strode forward, the ghost-head saber glinting coldly as it pointed at Lao Mei. The executioner reached out and plucked out the death saber from Lao Mei's back, shouting, "You and I have no enmity in the past, no enmity in the present. This is my duty, and I have no choice but to do it. Rest in peace on your way to the netherworld, and may you enjoy riches and glory in your next life." A bowl of strong wine was served to Lao Mei. The decapitation wine, drunk to the netherworld. Lao Mei laughed, his head moving as he knocked the bowl of wine to the ground. Could one still see their original intentions in this demon's world? Was this filthy mortal world still worth remembering? Even if there's a next life, I don't want it anymore. The executioner was unconcerned. He made a living by beheading and had spent half his life immersed in this art. He had faced too many people who were about to be beheaded and had seen all kinds of reactions. He poured himself a bowl of strong wine and drank half of it with a tilt of his head. He then poured the rest of the wine onto the ghost-head saber and raised it up high, shouting, "The gates of hell have opened, please be on your way." The ghost-head saber whistled as it fell. This was a decisive slash, a slash that severed everything in its path. Just as the decapitation was about to land, a low grunt rang out from afar. The muffled sound could be heard from afar, but it did not seem to be particularly loud, as if someone had made the sound nearby. However, with this sound, the space within 1,000 feet radius of the execution ground suddenly collapsed. The ghost-head saber in the executioner's hand was split into two. Then, a faint voice rang out, "Who dares to kill my brother?" It was Yun Xiaoyao's voice. Yun Yang, who was about to make his move, was startled, an inexplicable joy that he could hardly contain rising in his heart. His father was not dead. Before this, Shengguan Lingxiu and Shui Wuyin had comforted Yun Yang many times, and Yun Yang had analyzed the situation thoroughly, trying to tell himself that Yun Xiaoyao was not dead, that he had only disappeared for some reason, that no news was good news, and so on. However, how could Yun Yang not be worried? How could he not miss him? Ever since he vaguely knew that some of the 9 Supreme's elder brothers might not be dead, or even that most of them were not, Yun Yang had subtly invested more of his feelings into Yun Xiaoyao. He was not related to him by blood, but he seemed to be related by blood. Yin Yang was even afraid that if Yun Xiaoyao had really died because of Yu Qiankuan, could he really let him go? Now, Yin Xiaoyao had actually reappeared and appeared in the execution ground to save Lao Mei. It was a blessing from the heavens, making Yun Yang overjoyed. "How dare you, thief!" Just as Yun Xiaoyao's silhouette appeared and his voice rang out, 5 gray silhouettes appeared, tearing through the air from 5 different directions and charging towards Yun Xiaoyao. Then, an unusually intense battle broke out. Yun Xiaoyao let out a long howl. "Whoever wants to kill Mei Wenjian will be my, Yun Xiaoyao's, mortal enemy." The 5 strange enemies did not respond, but launched their attacks in unison, launching a ferocious assault on Yun Xiaoyao. Although Yun Xiaoyao would not be defeated on the spot, he could not spare any time to help Lao Mei. But the fact that he had arrived was already very clear. He had revealed his identity at the first instant. "I am King Xiaoyao. King Xiaoyao is me. I, Yun Xiaoyao, am not dead, so the accusation of Mei Wenjian murdering King Xiaoyao will naturally fall apart." The battle grew more intense, but the battle was also pulled further away. It was obvious that the enemies had forced Yun Xiaoyao far away, as the sounds of the battle grew further and further away from the execution ground. Just then, the executioner on the stage snorted coldly. "How dare a thief impersonate King Xiaoyao with malicious intentions?" After a pause, he continued, "Malicious intentions? Wishful thinking. Guards, continue the execution." Right at this moment, whoosh, 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 the originally clear and cloudless sky was suddenly filled with the sound of howling wind. It only took a moment for the wind to howl, growing more and more ferocious. Gradually, it was so strong that the people present could barely open their eyes. Far away, Yu Qiankuan and a masked man in black beside him, who were incognito and watching from a higher stand, had a serious look in their eyes. From the start to the ferocity of this gust of wind, it was only a matter of a split second. It was unusual. Someone was obviously making a move. Just as the wind was about to die down, countless clouds surged and rolled in the sky. It was as if a pot had been boiled, and they were gathering in this direction from all directions. North, south, east, and west, white clouds as thick as mountains could be seen. They rolled and surged, growing thicker and more numerous. They rolled and rolled, surging over. As the saying goes, the wind rises and the clouds gather, and the wind sweeps away the clouds. But today, even though the wind was like a dragon, sweeping across the world, the thick white clouds in the sky were completely unaffected by the wind, and continued to pour in from all directions. Everyone instinctively lifted their heads to look at the spectacle. It was a marvelous sight. There was still an azure blue sky in the sky, surrounded by white clouds that resembled a raging sea. Further out, more clouds were surging in, gradually joining the 4 directions. In the end, only the blue sky above their heads was left. No, even the remaining blue sky was shrinking bit by bit, being devoured and devoured by the sea of clouds. When the white clouds had completely covered the blue sky, the howling wind had reached its peak. When it swept past the ground again, it stopped abruptly. There was no wind at all. Only the white clouds in the sky were still tumbling endlessly. They were like towering mountains that kept piling up in the sky. Down below, the entire execution ground, no, the entire Tiantang city, was dumbfounded, rooted to the spot. This feeling, it was clearly a very familiar feeling. It was so familiar that the long-buried memory was suddenly recalled. The name that had controlled the world's winds and clouds all those years ago was uttered uncontrollably, unable to be suppressed. Lord Supreme Cloud. Chapter 1435. In the sky above Tiantang City. The clear sky in the middle was like a giant whirlpool. It caused the clouds in the sky to spin slowly, from slow to fast. It was as if something was about to form, but the person controlling everything behind the scenes was not in a hurry. He moved slowly, as if he was purposely keeping the scene for a little longer. He wanted everyone in the world to see the scene and the entire process of its formation. Looking at the earth-shattering phenomenon in the sky, countless people sighed inwardly. Too many people could not help but think of the same thing: such an ability. Such a godly skill. Such overwhelming power. Could it be controlled by a worldly imperial power? Could it be nurtured? It was utter nonsense. You could nurture civil officials and generals, but could you nurture a god? Countless people were overcome with emotion. It had been 7 years since Supreme Cloud had left. 7 years was a long time to the mundane world. After all, to an ordinary person, a person who had disappeared from their sight for more than half a year was enough to be forgotten completely. What was more, it had been 7 years. Let me say this: do not think that this is an exaggeration. In our lives, many people have either passed away or left familiar environments, never to be seen again. Then, in a very short time, we would forget about them. Even if they were family or close friends, it would be difficult to remember them after 2 to 3 years. Those who have experienced it can understand, but those who have not, please do not spout nonsense. Only one thing to say: how many of your elementary school classmates can you remember clearly when you're in high school? The clouds in the sky were still spinning freely. The people's senses grew stronger, as if the entire heaven and earth were spinning and dancing with the clouds. Suddenly, with a soft whoosh, the sky that had been obscured by the clouds returned to its clear, cloudless day. All the clouds in the sky, the clouds that were as big as mountains, had disappeared without a trace. While the traces of the clouds were gone, the boundless cloud chi had condensed into a human silhouette. The silhouette was clad in fluttering purple robes, his face handsome and valiant. However, the sole of his foot that stood in the air was almost the size of 2 city gates. Even from thousands of miles away, the giant's face could still be seen clearly. For a time, everyone went silent like cicadas in the winter, and they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Everyone recalled how they had slandered and tarnished Supreme Cloud during this period of time. The giant in the sky sighed softly and said leisurely, "It's been a long time since I've returned. I didn't expect that there would be no trace of the 9 Supremes left in this world." He smiled faintly. "If that's the case, the name Supreme Cloud should disappear from this world." He waved his hand and said, "However, I won't allow you to kill the heroes of the past." With a wave of his hand, Lao Mei, who had been tied up tightly, floated up into Supreme Cloud's palm. The rope disappeared in an instant. Supreme Cloud's leisurely voice rang out, "The butler of the residence of King Yun, Lao Mei, the famous name, Mei Wenjian." Back then, although he was a deputy general under King Yun's command, he went through the Battle of the Fort of Crimson Soul, the Battle of Daga Mountain, the Battle of Pingling Fort, the Battle of the Fortress of Resilience. This man and King Yun were like brothers. When King Yun was conferred the title of Marquis Xiaoyao, Mei Wenjian felt that he was severely injured and couldn't contribute to the country, so he followed King Yun out of the military, and managed the family business for King Yun. Although he was called the butler, he was actually King Yun's brother. Such an iron-blooded man. Supreme Cloud's voice echoed throughout the world. Now, he's being condemned as a traitor and beheaded in public. This isn't Mei Wenjian's sorrow, it's the empire of Yutong's and the entire nation's sorrow. Meritorious minister. The traitor who was about to be beheaded was actually being praised as a meritorious minister by Lord Supreme Cloud who had returned. At this moment, countless people's faces and ears were flushed red. Regardless of whether they were nearby or thousands of li away, they were all ashamed. Thinking back to how King Xiaoyao and King Yun had appeared to prove Mei Wenjian's innocence, no one had paid any attention to them. Furthermore, they had been cursing Mei Qianjian unrestrainedly and throwing random items at him. All of them were so ashamed that they couldn't even raise their heads. Someone shouted from the crowd, "Lord Supreme Cloud, it's not that we're ignorant or unreasonable. It's just that we're helpless against the current situation. There are many things that we can't control. Before the officials notice, we can only follow blindly." Yin Yang chuckled mockingly and said, "What a great word to use. Well used, well used. As the saying goes, one who doesn't know is not guilty. Indeed, there's no way to punish someone who wishes to be guilty. However, when the 9 Supremes attacked from all sides, the mountains shook and the earth quaked, the wind and thunder rolled, the water and fire soared into the sky. Surely many of you remember? Some of you have even experienced it personally, haven't you? The whole of Yutong is now filled with curses against the 9 Supremes. Where are all of you? With those things that you've experienced and encountered personally, how can you say that you're following blindly? The man below was immediately speechless. When the 9 Supremes dominated the world, there were too many people who had witnessed the 9 Supremes' miracles. There were even more people who were saved by the 9 Supremes from danger. How could they forget the past? Who knew how many times they had dreamt of the 9 Supremes dominating the battlefield and helping those in need? However, they had been brainwashed and interpreted over and over again all these years. The landslides back then were actually explosives that had been set up beforehand. The smell of smoke after the battle had already proven this point. And so on, the change of the weather and the rise of the lightning were merely astronomical phenomena that had been predicted a long time ago. The brilliant scholars of the imperial astronomer had repeatedly deduced the season, direction of the wind, and the change in temperature. Finally, they came to the conclusion that the wind and clouds were in their hands and the lightning and thunder were under their control. There was also the rising of water and fire, and the soaring of blood and chi. The former was caused by digging tunnels and collapsing dams in advance. Countless kerosene had been placed in advance, and when the water surged, the kerosene was poured on top of it. That was how water and fire came together. Water was used to resist fire, and its power was unwavering. The latter was even simpler. That battlefield was not littered with corpses and blood flowed like rivers. The so-called blood and chi in the sky was just a gimmick, for heroes, enemies of 10,000, and experts. The most straightforward example was that those who were twice as strong as an ordinary person would be known as Hercules. Those who were 10 times more powerful than an ordinary person would be considered a superhuman. However, could one defeat 100 people even if he was 10 times more powerful than an ordinary person? The people asked themselves, that's true. Even if I had 10 times more power and could easily kill 8 to 10 people, I couldn't possibly defeat 100 people. Therefore, those heroes who could wipe out thousands of enemies were really just an image that the country needed. Now that the world was at peace, there was no need for those heroic images to intimidate people. It was reasonable to tell the truth. All kinds of scientific interpretations and all kinds of assertions that made people feel as if they had experienced it for themselves completely reduced the legendary achievements of divine power to nothingness. This left everyone with only one feeling: wow, so that's how it is. That's reasonable. I said, I'm so powerful, but I can't even kill a dog. Then how could someone else kill 1,000 people like me with one punch? It's obviously a lie. Where is such a person? Why don't you ask him to try and punch me? All kinds of people who understood it were arrogant, disdainful, and cold. All kinds of people who believed in it were ridiculed and despised again and again. Wow, this person is so stupid. He actually believed in a made-up legend. Everyone, come and watch this idiot. Over time, all kinds of ridiculous things happened. Coupled with the inaction of the government, and even adding fuel to the fire, the original unwavering belief began to waver. Even if at first they still tried their best to maintain it, I saw it with my own eyes. They did not guard against people coming out immediately, quoting the classics and ridiculing, "Brother, did you see that? What is written here is what you saw back then, what you experienced, what you saw with your own eyes. That is the truth. History is not a story, not a fairy tale. How could the people involved not be shaken? Not to mention that the heroes of that time were long gone. They could not reappear and perform miracles to testify for you. Therefore, this kind of argument became more and more popular, until the heroic deeds were completely erased, the truth was completely distorted, and all the achievements were buried. In the end, the people rejoiced. We found the truth again, and confirmed history. At this moment, there was only silence below. When the miracle happened again, when the heroes reappeared and smashed reality right into their faces, everyone felt regret, sincere regret. What they had tried so hard to deny, what they had tried to destroy, what they had tried to humiliate, and what they had purposely trampled on, was actually our backbone, our dignity, our pride, and our beliefs. In the air, Yun-yang chuckled faintly. With a wave of his hand, Lao Mei was already nowhere to be seen. He waved his hand and said faintly, "Haven't you been looking for me to come down and fight you? Why do you have to hide? Let's end this quickly." Ever since Yun-yang appeared, the shadow formed by the gray fog beside Yu Qianquan had wanted to escape, but for some reason, he could not budge an inch. Right now, he was already regretting his actions to the extreme. He had long predicted Yun-yang's capabilities, even thinking that he had overestimated Yun-yang's ability level as much as possible. He was confident that he could deal with him. Even if he could not win in one go, there was still room for negotiation. Who would have thought that Supreme Cloud had only ascended for a few years, but his ability had improved by leaps and bounds? This was no longer a matter of disparity, but a matter of not being able to see it. Up until now, it seemed that the other party was only manipulating the wind and clouds in the air, dominating the heaven and earth. Yu Qianquan did not feel anything out of the ordinary, but he could no longer move. His spiritual energy wanted to dissipate, and he could not even self-destruct. The so-called earth-shattering battle, a battle between a dragon and a tiger, was only a one-sided fantasy, a foolish dream. It turned out that he was the biggest joke in the world. It was like an ant holding a straw stick and saying to a giant dragon, "I want to fight you." The most explosive point of this joke was that the giant dragon had accepted the challenge. It had moved against the ant. What kind of F***ck was this? Yu Qianquan stood where he was, turned into a statue. He was dumbfounded and speechless. His eyes were wide as he stared at Yun-yang, who had turned into a towering giant in the air. The words, "ninth uncle," were at the tip of his tongue, but he could not utter them. Yun-yang extended his hand and said faintly, "Come." With a soft swoosh, a ray of golden light shot out from Yun-yang's palm and turned into a golden path. It crossed thousands of feet and came before gray fog. Gray mist. Elder Qin, the founding ancestor of the school of Kismet State, landed on the golden path in a daze uncontrollably. Under the watchful eyes of millions of people, the golden path shortened bit by bit. It shrunk all the way back into Yun-yang's palm. Elder Qin finally appeared in front of Yun-yang. To be exact, he was on Yun-yang's palm. "Your surname is Qin?" Yun-yang pinched Elder Qin with 2 fingers and looked at him curiously. "I heard that you've hidden a lot of your power. Since this is a battle of life and death, we won't rest until one of us is dead. Why don't you call them out for me to see and broaden my horizons?" Gray Fog's Elder Qin could not help but tremble, unable to control himself. "You still have 6 ghost messengers?" "Oh, no, there are only 5 left now. I've already caught one. It should be the 5 fellows who are attacking my father over there, right?" Yun-yang said faintly, "Since everyone has shown themselves, let them all come over then." With a swoosh, the 5 strange shadows that were battling Yun Xiaoyao appeared in Yun-yang's hands as if they were commanded to do so. Yun-yang fiddled with them casually, placing the other 5 spirits together with Elder Qin. The 6 souls were all trembling in Yun-yang's palm. At this moment, Elder Qin, the founding ancestor of the school of Kismet State, was not just freaking out, he was basically doubting his own life. What kind of divine power was this? How could anyone in this world possess such boundless power? As for the humiliation of being manipulated in the palm of someone else's hand in front of millions of people, he did not even take it to heart. How could he care about such trivial matters now? "I've never understood where you fellows get your courage from." Yun-yang sighed and said, "I've already left this world, but you fellows still have to think of ways to bring me back. Do you still want to kill me? Now, I'm standing here as you wish. It's a pity that you fellows." Yun-yang sighed softly, "So weak that I'm not even interested in taking a look at you. So weak that I'm not even interested in taking a look at you." Elder Qin could only feel an extreme humiliation surging in his heart. His emotions that had been suppressed to the lowest point surged once more. Supreme Cloud! Elder Qin shouted with all his might, right now, in this situation, it's not that we're too weak, it's that you're too strong. So strong that you're unshakable and unrivaled. We're not on the same level as you at all. If we were to forcefully compare ourselves, it would only be obvious who's superior and who's inferior. What's the point? Yin Yang could not help but chuckle. That's right, but the source of this is you fellows who summoned me here by force. Haven't you fellows thought that I, who has already ascended to the upper realm, am no longer on the same level as you fellows? Shouldn't you have long known that you're asking for humiliation and overestimating your own capabilities if you insist on fighting me? Now you're bringing this up again. What's there to talk about? Elder Qin was at a loss for words. Yes, why did they summon him? Why did they summon this formidable foe who had already ascended to the upper realm and was not on the same level as them? Was everything that was happening before his eyes a suicidal act that hastened his own defeat? At this moment, the regret in his heart was indescribable. Why did they provoke him? Why? He was filled with remorse and wished he could turn back. Yes, as long as Supreme Cloud was killed or defeated, the myth of the 9 Supremes that Supreme Cloud had created would be completely crushed. Then, the providence that Supreme Cloud had used to unify the world could be snatched away through an arcane technique. This was the truth, and it was also a benefit. But, how could they kill him? The ant wanted to kill the dinosaur, how could they fight it head-on? Why did he not lay low for a little longer? He had waited for centuries, millennia, and tens of thousands of years. What was the point of waiting a little longer? If he waited for a long time, so long that he had forgotten about this world, when he came out again, would everything not be in his hands? Why was he so eager to succeed? He knew that he was facing someone who had ascended to the upper realm. How could it be so easy to snatch it away? Why was he so eager? The legendary Lord of Heaven still possessed the providence to create a world. Why did he not snatch it away? In this world, although daring to think about it meant that he was halfway to success, one could still fall short of success at the last step, let alone a mayfly trying to shake a tree or a frog in a well peeking at the sky. My clone's soul isn't nearby, it's scattered all over this continent. It's everywhere, everywhere. Lord Supreme Cloud has defeated me today, but when it comes to defeating me... Before Elder Qin could finish his words, he heard Supreme Cloud's faint chuckle. Defeat you? When did I defeat you? If I were to say the word defeat, doesn't that mean I'm treating you as an opponent? Do you think it's more glorious for you to say this? Although Elder Qin was in the form of a soul, he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Yes, when did he defeat you? As the saying went, a horse does not know how long its face is, a bull does not bend its horns, and a man does not know his own strength. Below him, guffaws of laughter could be heard. Yin Yang waved his hand and beams of dark light emerged from the bodies of many people from all directions. They were like rivers flowing into the sea, rushing towards Yin Yang like moths to a flame. Streak after streak of streak after streak, you've set up 500 remnant souls in and around Tiantang City. How generous. Yin Yang sighed softly. Wuyin, I have to say that I'm surprised that you didn't expose yourself under such circumstances, but I'm even more satisfied. Shui Wuyin, who was below, smiled faintly. He was supporting Yun Xiaoyao, whom he had seen for a long time. Yun Xiaoyao looked at his son in the sky, his eyes filled with pride and longing. Although he doesn't have my bloodline, this is my son. He'll be my son no matter where he goes. Yin Yang did not destroy the 500 remnant souls right away. Instead, he gathered them together with Elder Qin's soul. Elder Qin's soul expanded visibly. In spite of this, Elder Qin was terrified. Other than the 300 remnant souls that he had placed on the surface, there were another 200 that were in hibernation as backup. Perhaps it was because they were too close or for some other reason, but Yin Yang had managed to plunder all of them. Not a single one was left out. All of them were gathered here. At this moment, he was on the brink of despair. It's about time. We should begin officially. Yin Yang said with a smile, although there are other ways to find your other remnant souls, it would take too much time. Secondly, I intend to let the people of this world witness the so-called supernatural power. Let's seize this opportunity today. Now, I'll show all of you a more interesting ability. Ghost refining. Before he finished speaking, he pushed out with his palm. Old Man Qin's soul suddenly flew out and stopped in midair. Then, a ball of blue flame appeared under his body. Old Qin's soul began to wail miserably within the deep blue flame. It struggled and twisted unceasingly, taking on all kinds of forms. However, it was still unable to escape. I will not yield. Elder Qin cried out in agony. He howled miserably as he was burned by the deep blue flames. He wanted to hold it in and not let out a scream, but he couldn't hold it in at all. It was an excruciating pain that burned his soul. It was not something that could be easily endured. That kind of pain was thousands of times more intense than ordinary physical pain. The blue flame only burned for a moment before it stopped. However, Elder Qin's soul had been burned beyond recognition. It had shrunk visibly. He floated in the air, muttering to himself, I won't speak, I won't yield, that's great. Yin Yang smiled faintly and said, I like unyielding men, they give me the motivation to go on. Don't you ever give in. Then, a ball of energy surged into Elder Qin's soul. Elder Qin was shocked to realize that his soul, which he thought was about to perish, had actually recovered. It had recovered to its peak state. He was full of vigor and energy, in peak condition. However, the serene blue flame started burning again. Everyone in Tiantang City was watching the scene unfold, watching the strange soul being burned by Lord Supreme Cloud as if it was happening right in front of their eyes. The wails seemed to come from his own soul. They watched blankly, watching the soul go from refusing to die to begging for mercy, then repeating the process of being burned and recovered again and again. It was a full 20 times. After 20 times, Elder Qin had recovered once more, but he had completely broken down. I'll confess. I'll confess everything. I'll find them now. Let me die, let my soul be destroyed, let my soul be destroyed. There's no hurry. Yin Yang's voice was warm. You're a man of steel. Why would you be in such a hurry to confess? You're just putting on an act, trying to deceive everyone. Let's take it slow. Why do I think you can at least pull through another 100 times? No. Elder Qin screamed in agony, let me die. The torment of the soul had kept him in a completely conscious state, unlike ordinary people who could faint if they could not withstand it. However, Elder Qin did not even have the right to faint, he did not even have the right to lose his mind. He was conscious from the beginning to the end. In particular, he would recover to his peak state after each burn, allowing the burning process to be the longest and most complete. Elder Qin realized this clearly, causing him to feel even more hopeless. As long as Supreme Cloud was not willing, he would not die. This kind of torture would continue forever. Now, he did not want anything else but to die. Even if he had to summon all of his clones and hand them over, he would not hesitate. However, this kind of torture was endless, and came one after another. He had already started to beg for mercy from the third burn, but Supreme Cloud was still unwilling to give in even after the 20th burn. Really, I've never seen such an interrogation. Tell me, Yin Yang said faintly. Tell me everything, what did you do? Or, do you want to continue being stubborn? Old Qin recovered once more, but his mentality, state, courage, and everything else were shattered. There was no longer any thought of resisting or lying. As long as he could die a quick death, he would do anything. Everything that had happened in the Empire of Yutong during this period of time was clearly revealed to the world through Old Qin's intermittent narration. The millions of people listening below were all dumbfounded. Yu Qianquan, who was on the stage, looked ashen. Although Elder Qin did not mention him and even tried to avoid him, the emperor, those who were observant would have thought that without the emperor's permission, how could these decrees be passed on to the world? Chapter 1436. A moment later. The entire square and the people of Tiantang City were still immersed in a stupefied atmosphere. Their first thought was that they seemed to have fallen into a huge conspiracy, that they had been deceived, that they had been used from the beginning to the end. Furthermore, they had become a tool used by the bad guys to attack the person they were supposed to respect the most. Even though no one had spoken for a long time and there wasn't the slightest sound, the entire place was silent, but everyone's rapid breathing had long since sold out their state of mind and emotions, and an extreme rage that was waiting to erupt could surge out at any moment. The white clouds in the sky surged once more as the giant formed from the endless clouds was slowly disappearing. Did this mean that Supreme Cloud was about to leave again? After another moment of silence, the millions of people below cried out with tears streaming down their cheeks, "Lord Supreme Cloud! Don't go! Lord Supreme Cloud!" Millions of people cried out in unison. Their voices were deafening and could be heard hundreds of miles away. However, the giant in the sky was still disappearing, as if it did not hear the voices of the people. Seeing this scene, everyone felt a sudden emptiness in their hearts. They stared blankly at the disappearing giant. All of them could sense that something important was about to leave them forever. Many of them suddenly recalled that the spot right below where the cloud giant had materialized was where Supreme Cloud's stone statue had once stood. Back then, the 100-foot-tall giant had been smashed into pieces by them, hammer after hammer. "Lord Supreme Cloud! We were wrong, we were wrong." Countless people cried, apologizing in sorrow and begging for the giant to stay, but it was useless. The giant was still disappearing. There was no longing, no intention to stay for even a moment longer. At this time, a shrill voice rang out, "Ninth Uncle." The giant in the sky finally stopped, pausing for a moment. The voice cried out again, "Ninth Uncle, don't go. I'm Bauer. Don't go." However, the giant did not stop, finally disappearing without a trace. It did not stop because of the people. With a sudden bang, the cloud giant in the sky disappeared completely. The sky above Tiantang City was clear once more. There was nothing left. The sky was clear and the sun was shining brightly, but everyone was still dazed, unable to speak or move for a long time. On the tall building in the distance, Yu Qiankuan's face was already covered in tears, and his majestic aura of a sovereign realm expert had dissipated. In the end, Uncle Jiao still left some face for himself. He indicated to the people that he was held hostage by the monster soul and that everything was out of his control. It was not his subjective will. However, Uncle Jiao just left like that, without even saying a word to him. What did this mean? Was it that Uncle Jiao was so disappointed with him that he had nothing to say? Before this, he had thought that it didn't matter. Uncle Jiao wouldn't blame him. Even if he did, he wouldn't kill him, let alone depose him. Apart from that, nothing else mattered. His guess was right. Uncle Jiao didn't do anything to him, and he even saved his face. But now that things had developed to this day, and everything had fallen into his control, why did he feel so empty? It was clearly a bright and sunny day, but why did it feel like the world was shrouded in haze? It was an extremely lonely atmosphere that suddenly surged into his heart and was difficult to eliminate. Yu Qiankuan stood there in a daze, looking at the sky where the giant had already disappeared. Suddenly, tears surged out of his eyes. He choked again and muttered, "Ninth Uncle." It was at this moment that he felt someone approaching him swiftly. The Imperial guards around him were still immersed in the previous shock, completely unaware of the presence. Yu Qiankuan turned to look and saw that it was Shui Wuyin. He asked weakly, "What are you doing here?" Shui Wuyin said, "Lord Supreme Cloud asked me to bring you a message. Fang Mafei and Bai Shue, whom you've detained, please release them, Your Majesty." Yu Qiankuan's eyes glinted. "All right. Does Ninth Uncle have any other instructions?" Shui Wuyin looked at Yu Qinkuan's hopeful gaze and said with a shake of his head, "No." Yu Qinkuan's gaze dimmed once more, looking even more dejected than before. "Where is ninth uncle now? Is he at the residence of King Yun?" Shui Wuyin said calmly, "The residence of King Yun is gone. It's been turned into ashes by Lord Supreme Cloud himself. There's only a piece of flat land left at the residence of King Yun now. There's not even the slightest bit of ruins left. All traces related to the Yun family name are gone." Yu Qinkuan's body swayed, almost falling to the ground. The residence of King Yun had been turned into a piece of flat land, with no traces left? Shui Wuyin said, "It's not just the residence of King Yun. All traces of the 9 supremes in this world, those that once appeared on this continent, no longer exist. Even the temple of the 9 supremes at Tianxian Cliff no longer exists in this world. Tianxian Cliff has been erased from this world by Lord Supreme Cloud." Yu Qinkuan took a deep breath and shut his eyes tightly. "This commoner shall take his leave." "Where are you going?" "Lord Supreme Cloud has arranged a place for this commoner to stay for the rest of his life. This commoner shall retire from the martial world from now on." Shui Wuyin said quietly, "From now on, the 9 supremes no longer exist in this world. Naturally, the 9 heavens dictum will cease to exist as well. Everything shall be as your majesty wishes. From now on, you shall reign over the world without any more restraints. Your reign shall last for 100 generations." Shui Wuyin turned and left with large strides. Looking at Shui Wuyin's back, Yu Qinkuan struggled to ask, "Those Yutong's old officials? Ninth uncle didn't say anything?" Shui Wuyin's footsteps did not stop as his indifferent voice drifted over, "No, Lord Supreme Cloud has nothing more to say." Shui Wuyin walked further and further away. His figure could no longer be seen, but Yu Qinkuan was still standing there in a daze. Ninth uncle had left just like that. The 9 supremes, who had wiped out all traces with their own hands, had left. Before he left, he only asked for his 2 old subordinates. He didn't even leave me with a sentence like, "Take care of yourself." It's obvious how disappointed ninth uncle is in me. Yu Qinkuan sighed softly, feeling the pain in his heart like a raging sea. It's strange. I thought that since my parents passed away, there wouldn't be any sadness that could strike me. But today, I've achieved my wish. I'm no longer restrained in this world. I'm the only one in the world, but why do I feel even sadder, more lonely, and more lost than before? Ninth uncle. I only want to be a good emperor. Yun Yang was currently flying out of Tiantang City with old Qin and the others in tow. Yun Xiaoyao, Shui Wuyin, Lao Mei, as well as Bai Yixue and Fang Mafei who had just been released. All of them were intact. With a wave of Yun Yang's sleeve, they were already thousands of miles away. In this lifetime, they would never return to Tiantang City or Yutong. Yun Xiaoyao asked, "Here, you really don't plan to go back to take a look?" "Not going back." Yun Yang's expression was indifferent, but his tone was even more indifferent. "Can you really let it go? Is there nothing left for you to miss?" Yun Xiaoyao smiled. "Nothing. The child has grown up, he's no longer a helpless child. I've wiped away all traces related to the 9 supremes, the cause and effect no longer exist. His future path, good or bad, is all up to him. That's good too. What about you? Since Big Brother passed away, I have nothing left for Yutong. To me, a part of my life has passed just like that." Yun Xiaoyao's smile was indifferent. "Then, let's go to the Cloud Gate." "All right, to the Cloud Gate." Beyond the border, under Yun Yang's manipulation that surpassed the limits of a human's ability, 3 mountains broke out from the ground and rose rapidly until they reached the clouds. Looking at the clouds halfway up the mountain, a palace stood out of thin air. It was the Cloud Gate that Yun Yang had mentioned. Inside the Cloud Gate, flowers bloomed everywhere, with countless pavilions and towers hidden in the clouds. There were also many elegant courtyards hidden under the shade of the trees. Shui Wuyin, Lao Mei, Fang Mafei, Bai Shue, and the rest were all here. Qiu Jianhan, Fang Qingtian, the Shengguan family of generals, Tai Zheng, Fu Baogua, and the rest were here as well. When they were free, they would go out for a walk and come back to rest when they were tired. The important matters of the imperial court seemed to have nothing to do with these people anymore. The elderly who had worked hard for the country and the people for their entire lives came here to enjoy their remaining years. They could finally put everything down and start taking care of themselves, to live a few more years, to cultivate, to have fun, to live happily. Shui Wuyin's 9 heavens dictum had also settled down here, but they did not really stop. Their military force and intelligence network were still developing in secret. It was like an invisible network that slowly spread its tentacles to every corner of the world. Yun Yang had purposely set an iron rule. The descendants of the Cloud Gate could roam the world anonymously and do something for the world if they wanted to be high officials and nobles, not letting down what they had learned in their lifetime. However, they were not to be too attached to power and position. When an official reached a certain level, they had to retreat and they were not allowed to use the Cloud Gate's power to interfere with the change of the dynasty in this world. The residences of a few old officials of the imperial court were arranged in a huge courtyard that was the size of a city. The entrance of the courtyard was decorated with a common couplet. It's better to retreat when you've received a favor, it's better to stop when you're satisfied. One should never wait until one's achievements shocked the master. Even if they had the ability to protect themselves and could retreat unscathed, it was inevitable that they would be heartbroken. As for Tai Zheng, Fu Baogua, and the others, their ambitions had not died yet. The Cloud Gate could protect their lives, but they had refused to stay within the Cloud Gate and stayed at the outermost area instead. It was obvious that these few invincible marshals still had other thoughts in their minds. The gust of depression had yet to dissipate. Yin Yang did not say anything about this. He did not approve of it nor did he stop it. He could do whatever he wanted. If by any chance, the Cloud Gate would protect him and his family. The few of you have the potential to ascend. If you ascend to the bound of universe, head to the Palace of 9 Supremes as soon as possible. That is our home in the bound of universe. Yin Yang told Bai Shue, Fang Mafei, and the others. However, the Cloud Gate must be protected before you ascend. All right. As for Qiu Jianhan and the others, they were already old. Although Yin Yang had the means to turn things around and make them immortal, these elders had gone through the change of Yutang's imperial court and had tasted the fickleness of the world, tasting the joys and sorrows of life. They no longer had any attachment to this life. They could not even wait to start a new life. The so-called immortality was merely torture to them. Yin Yang could do nothing about it. He could only strengthen their souls to ensure that when they reached the end of their lifespan and reincarnated, their true spirits would remain intact. Of course, Yin Yang had some regrets about this. After all, they would no longer be close friends after reincarnation. However, Qiu Jianhan and the others were looking forward to it. It was obvious that they had seen through the world and did not want to be tied down by the past anymore. Time passed by slowly. A few months had passed almost in the blink of an eye. On this day, Yin Yang felt something and left the Cloud Gate with Shengguan Lingxiu and Yun Xiaoyao, heading towards Tiantang City. Father, both of us are going to see the old emperor for the last time before we return. All right. Yun Xiaoyao felt that this period of time was the happiest and most comforting of his life. His son was filial and his daughter-in-law was virtuous. He probably had no regrets in this life and nothing more to ask for. Father, who was the one who saved you back then? Yin Yang finally asked this question. Yun Xiaoyao had never spoken of this matter. He did not even mention a word or two. Yin Yang was very curious about this. Now that they were about to part, he finally asked. Yun Xiaoyao laughed and said leisurely, with your profound cultivation base, do you still need to consult your father? The person who saved your father was a very, very good person, a very, very good person. That day, it was as easy as lifting a hand to save your father. It was laughable that the founder of the school of Kismet State thought that he could completely kill your father. How could he know the vastness of the universe with his meager cultivation base? How could the Almighty's ability be fathomed? That fellow was very jealous of me. This is something that will make me laugh for the rest of my life. Ha ha ha. Yin Yang was bewildered. With Yin Yang's profound wisdom, he had already connected the dots with just a few words. Some expert had saved Yun Xiaoyao right under old Qin's nose. Furthermore, it seemed that in Yun Xiaoyao's eyes, this savior was an almighty being, one who was even more powerful than himself. However, how could there be such an almighty being in this world? He had guessed that it was Jun Moyan, but Jun Moyan did not seem to be old Qin's opponent. He definitely did not have such a skill. Furthermore, why would such an almighty being be jealous of Yun Xiaoyao? Why? Haven't you figured it out yet? Where's Supreme Wit's wisdom? Sigh, you're not a father yet. It's reasonable for you to be blinded by a leaf. Let's put it this way. If I'm not mistaken, that person should be your biological father. Yun Xiaoyao said with a smile, back then, I was already suffering from the poison. I was told that I would be fine even if my life hung in the balance, but he healed me with just a lift of his hand and removed the poison. He even changed me with God's blood and a set of saints' bones. He only had one request for me, a very strange one. What request? How strange? He wanted me to find a wife quickly and have a son as soon as possible. He wanted me to not fight for my son with him anymore. Yin Xiaoyao laughed. Yin Yang could not help but laugh as well. What did you say? Yin Xiaoyao chuckled. Although my ability is not as good as his, how could I give in on this? I told him directly that he was a man with a wife. It would be much easier for him to have another child than for me. This son of yours is destined to bear the surname of Yun for the rest of his life. Ha ha ha, that old thing actually threatened me. How could I, Yin Xiaoyao, be someone who can be threatened? The moment he opened his mouth to make a request, he had already exposed his guilt. Humph. Yin Yang and Shangguan Lingxiu burst into laughter. However, I'll be practicing Go wholeheartedly for a long time after this. That old thing told me that my son's heart is incomparable to his, but he's still my savior after all. So, he decided to use the game of Go as a wager. The ownership of my son will be the stake of the wager. How can this old man be a coward? I've agreed to it right away. A mere game of Go is not worth mentioning. This old man has decided to devote himself to this art and will never lose to him. He gave me 100 years. 100 years, can I not even play a mere game of Go? Yin Xiaoyao was brimming with confidence. Yin Yang chuckled bitterly. He thought to himself, why don't you just agree to play Go with him? Yin Xiaoyao said, but, who can tell what will happen in the future? Still, I'm not worried. You have such a powerful father as your backing, and you're so outstanding. This old man will have no more worries in this life, especially without regrets. In front of the mausoleum of Yutang's emperor, Emperor Yupeiza, father and son stood solemnly to offer incense. Royal brother, half of your wish has been fulfilled. To you, perhaps you still have regrets, but to the world, this emperor, even if he's not considered good, he's not bad either. He's a qualified successor. Yin Xiaoyao sighed softly. He could not help recalling the conversations his brother, the emperor, had had in his residence a few times during his last moments. Bao is the only successor and the most qualified successor. His Majesty's voice had been filled with melancholy then. Let him be. It was also what His Majesty had said then. Had this emperor, who had commanded for his entire life, sensed something long ago? His last move was to plan for the future, but was it not to protect the lives of his old brothers as well? However, there was no way to verify all of this. It had all gone with the wind. Your Majesty, is the prosperous world today as you wish, as you're happy to see it? Yin Yang asked softly and lit up an incense stick. Through his deific consciousness, Yu Qiankuan already knew that someone was paying respects here and had guessed something. He was hurrying out of the palace and heading over. Yin Yang sighed softly. Let's go. Yin Xiaoyao squinted at him. Still not meeting? It's better not to meet. Let's not meet. You're rather ruthless. Am I? If you're really unfortunate when you're old, then you'll know how ruthless Yin Yang can be. Besides, as long as I don't see him, he'll be filled with guilt. With guilt, he'll feel more pressured, and he'll be able to treat the world better. If I see him, he might feel relieved instead. So, it's better not to see him. Yin Yang chuckled. I've never been made to be an emperor, nor do I understand the mind of an emperor. Naturally, I can't think of what an emperor should be like. It's hard for me to understand and I don't agree with what he's doing. So, I've chosen to let go. What a good let go. Ha 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 ha. Yin Xiaoyao chortled. This old man is leaving. With a flash, he vanished without a trace. He did not even bid farewell to Yin Yang. Yin Yang and Shangguan Lingxiu smiled at each other and stood up. With a ripple of space, they were already tens of thousands of miles away, on a huge mountain. Yu Qianquan galloped over like his life depended on it. Ninth uncle, wait for me. He urged the horse anxiously, galloping as fast as lightning. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, I just want to hear you call me, Bao, again. However, when he arrived at the imperial mausoleum, it was quiet and there was no one around. There were only 3 incense sticks burning quietly in front of the mausoleum. There was nothing else. Chapter 1437. This is the headquarters of the School of Kismet State? Shangguan Lingxiu asked in slight surprise as she stared at the place that could not even be considered a ruin. I wasn't the one who ended the School of Kismet State's annihilation that day, but it was De Guichou and Ling Xiaozui. I thought that with their experience and knowledge, there wouldn't be any hidden dangers. I was thinking about the final battle with the Four Seasons Tower then, so I didn't come back. I didn't expect that the School of Kismet State would still be in trouble. Speaking of which, I should be thankful for Ling Xiaozui and De Guichou. If the founding patriarch, Old Qin, had come out of seclusion earlier, they wouldn't have been able to gain any advantage over the 2 of them. Instead, they would have been in danger of being wiped out. Yin Yang said softly. Then what's the reason for revisiting this place? Old Qin has fallen into your hands. Annihilating him is as easy as lifting a finger. He's the founding patriarch of the School of Kismet State. There shouldn't be anyone above him, right? Shangguan Lingxiu asked. There's no harm in being careful. I still feel that something is not right. Yin Yang said, a world fragment like the Tianxian continent can only sustain a limited amount of individual power. A 10,000-year-old immortal spirit like Elder Qin really shouldn't exist in this world. Now that it has appeared, it's against the norm, there must be some unique opportunity, and the place that's tied to it the most is the starting place where it has cultivated for countless years. Yin Yang smiled. I'm really curious. What is this difference? As he spoke, Yin Yang summoned Old Qin. Old Qin was in perfect condition now, but the moment he saw Yin Yang, he could not help the intense fear and dread that colored his face. To Old Qin, Supreme Cloud was the most terrifying demon, his insanity was infuriating. He understood and felt that this person was by no means a benevolent person. It was not by chance that he had annihilated an army of hundreds of thousands with a wave of his hand, nor was it a last resort. Among all the famed generals in the continent, there was no one who could kill more than Supreme Cloud who stood before him. Others could kill tens of thousands of people in a war. It could be said that a general's success was built on the bones of tens of thousands, a living god of death. However, a single Supreme Cloud battle would cost at least 100,000 lives. After so many years, how could it be just 10 million lives? Corpses piled up like mountains and blood flowed like oceans. Open your most secret place and let me see. Yin Yang ordered faintly. Old man Qin didn't say anything and immediately started to move. To him, Yin Yang's words were more sacred than an imperial edict. With Yin Yang's command, it was as if he had received the imperial edict and ran faster than a dog. And all he wanted was a quick death. When he was being watched by Emmy, he was even more fearful than before. However, he was determined and had tried to self-destruct again and again, hoping to end this quickly. It was a pity that his attempts were futile even after 7 to 8 times. It wasn't that his self-detonation didn't fail. In fact, it succeeded every time. However, after self-detonation, he should have been reduced to ashes. When he regained his consciousness, he was shocked to find that he was still in the same place. Still alive? Even if he successfully self-destructed, he wouldn't die. Even if his soul was destroyed, he could still come back to life. No matter how determined old Qin was, he could only submit to Yun Yang wholeheartedly and pray that he would be eliminated. That would be the end. As a gust of Yin Qi rose, the gravel at the top of the mountain flowed away like quicksand and disappeared. Somewhere deep in the school of Kismet State's old site, a huge tunnel appeared. Just as Yun Yang and the others entered the tunnel, the surface of the tunnel returned to its original state. From the outside world, it looked like the tunnel had never existed in this world. Yun Yang and Shangguan Lingxiu were naturally unafraid of any danger in this world. They went down the tunnel, traveling thousands of feet in one go. Suddenly, there was something that looked like an underground square. Yun Yang squinted his eyes. To him, no matter how mysterious an underground square was, no matter how extravagant it was nothing. However, the altar in front of him caused his expression to change. Those were God's bones. In the center of the altar, there were 108 bones. They were all femur bones, each corresponding to a position. The 108 bones formed a perfect circle. On top of the circle, there was a huge cauldron. It was also densely packed with God's bones. At this moment, Yun Yang was struck with a sudden realization. The real reason why the school of Kismet State's founding grandmaster could exist for so long was because of God's bones. The school of Kismet State had collected so many God's bones in the eons since its founding. The scale was much more than what the Four Seasons Tower had collected back then, at least a dozen times more. Compared to the Four Seasons Tower's method of assimilating the God's bones directly into the body to increase the user's combat power, nourish the God's bones in reverse for future use, the school of Kismet State had taken a different path. They had thrown all the God's bones they had obtained into this altar, absorbing the power of the God's bones bit by bit in a subtle way to nourish the souls in the altar. With a sweep of his divine sense, Yun Yang understood everything. The total number of God's bones in this altar, big and small, was more than 500 pieces. It could almost be said that finding these God's bones was equivalent to recalling all the bones that had been lost in the land of God's bones. It's great to have such a harvest, but where did the school of Kismet State collect so many God's bones from? Although the school of Kismet State was formidable and stood above all the sects in the secular world, it was still lacking compared to the Four Seasons Tower. The Four Seasons Tower had only obtained so little. How could the school of Kismet State have so many? It doesn't make sense. Yun Yang did not spend too much time pondering on this question. With old Qin beside him, he could just ask directly. There was no need to think too much. Old Qin answered, back when I hadn't established the school of Kismet State, I'd built a hut here and lived. I focused on cultivating my martial arts, intending to achieve what no one had done before me, to turn my body into a saint and ascend to heaven. I really can't remember which day it was. I don't know what happened to the space above my head either, but a lot of things fell down noisily. I was cultivating at the top of the mountain then. Due to the sudden turn of events, I was buried by the things that fell from the sky. My internal breath was disturbed and I was about to go berserk. Then, the spiritual qi in these things flowed like a tide, guiding my internal breath that had gone astray back to the right path. The berserk was cured without medicine. Seeing how magical these things were, of course, I had to keep them all. The things that fell back then weren't just God's bones, there were many other things as well. There were common items among the people and there were also things that the martial artists of this world couldn't use, some weapons, for example. Yin Yang's gaze moved and noticed a few weapons displayed on a wall. They looked simple and unadorned, but they contained immense power. Upon closer inspection, however, he realized that the weapons felt out of place in this space. These weapons seem to have owners and are full of spirituality. I've tried many times and confirmed that the owners of these weapons aren't completely dead yet, so others can't use them at all. If they forcefully use them, they'll be devoured instead. Old Qin was speechless. He had been knocked out by the mountain of gold that had fallen from the sky. He had confirmed again and again that he had indeed obtained the mountain of gold, and it was even more precious than the mountain of gold. However, the most valuable part of this mountain of gold, he could not even touch it, he could only stare at it. One could only imagine the frustration he felt. I'm not fated to be a weapon, but those bones are of great help to me. With the help of the spiritual energy that's slowly flowing out of those bones, my cultivation has improved by leaps and bounds. After a few decades of cultivation, I've broken through to the supreme level. However, after I've broken through to the supreme level, I can't help but want to obtain a weapon to increase my strength. My goal is that sword. Yin Yang and Shangguan Lingxiu turned to look and saw a sword leaning against the wall. It was simple and unadorned, yet it exuded an indescribable elegance. Even though it had been sealed for thousands of years, the blade was still spotless. It was obvious that it was a peerless divine weapon that was extraordinary. I, who boasted of my great improvement, tried to infiltrate it with my spiritual consciousness, hoping to destroy the original owner's spiritual imprint. Unexpectedly, I was killed by the sword's soul. Although I survived by luck, I sacrificed my long lifespan and was only left with a few decades to live. How could I, who had long aspired to become a saint and transcend this world, be willing to die just like that? Using what I've learned in this lifetime, I built this altar to store my soul and nurture it. This altar can even accept the power of providence as a sacrifice. After that, I spent another 20 years to build the school of Kismet state to ensure that the flame would be passed down and that my altar would be endlessly nourished. Old Qin was speechless. I had planned to have an endless flow of providence. One day, I'd be able to achieve the embodiment of providence. Then, I'd fuse all of these gods' bones into myself, but the outcome was obvious. Yutang's unification of Tianxian continent was different from the school of Kismet state's designated goal. The providence backfired and the headquarters of the school of Kismet state was destroyed by Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou. Space shattered? Yin Yang frowned. He did not expect such a change to occur when God's bones were left behind. No wonder this place was not discovered by the Four Seasons Tower. This fellow was not the leader of a sect before he obtained God's bones. His cultivation base was barely passable at that time. He knew that obtaining God's bones by chance was the true leap in his cultivation base, but he had been devoured by the soul of the sword when his mystical art had just been accomplished. No one would have thought that the school of Kismet state, the one who claimed to be the one who would decide the change of the imperial city in this world, was actually a tool for this fellow's personal gain. It was obvious that he had not told anyone about this secret, so the people from the school of Kismet state who came later had no idea that there were so many treasures buried under their buttocks. It had to be said that the entire incident was absurd and ludicrous. Yin Yang's thoughts spun as he gradually released his deific consciousness that he had been suppressing. He searched the space above carefully, repeatedly, like quicksilver spilling on the ground, to see if there was a spatial node like the god's grave somewhere in this world. If what old Qin said was true, that God's bones had descended from heaven, then there must be a similar spatial node in this space. After searching for a long time, Yin Yang only found a tiny trace that seemed to have collapsed in this space. It was not obvious, but it was also inconspicuous. If it were not for old Qin's words, Yin Yang would not have dared to confirm that it was a sign of the space collapsing. But this bit of evidence was enough. At least, it was enough for Yin Yang now. Yin Yang did not hesitate as he kept all the god's bones and all the weapons that were left here into the spatial ring that stored God's bones. Anything else? Yin Yang stared at old Qin. He had his own reasons for asking this question, but he still had to ask to see if this fellow was really being honest. At the bottom of the altar, there are 10 skulls. Old Qin was really honest. He didn't try to play any tricks as he said everything without any hesitation. He was well aware that with the cultivation level of this person before him, not to mention hiding under the altar, even if he hid in the deepest part of the entire continent, he would still be able to find him with just a thought. The reason why he asked him this question was purely because he was treating him as a joke. Or perhaps, he was playing a prank and wanted to use this as an excuse to punish him again. Yin Yang chuckled and took out the god's bones that were hidden under the altar. Old Qin said knowingly, "There's nothing left this time." "There's nothing left." Yin Yang hummed in acknowledgement. With a wave of his sleeve, the entire underground space was reduced to dust with a loud bang. Everything was no longer in this world. At the same time, Yin Yang and the rest had already left the place and went to the foot of the mountain where the school of Kismet State used to be. "If there's nothing else, we'll be going back." Yin Yang looked at Shangguan Lingxiu and asked, "Is there anything you can't let go of?" Shangguan Lingxiu bit her lip and sighed, saying, "I still want to visit grandmother and my nephews, but I think I won't go. I want to see her and she wants to see me too, but the pain of parting every time takes a toll on her body. She's already so old, it's better not to see each other, that's why I want to go, but I'm afraid to." Shangguan Lingxiu was conflicted. "Then don't go for now." Yin Yang said, "When your cultivation base breaks through to the level of saint and condenses your qi, you can leave a clone here to keep the elderly company. Isn't that better than anything else?" Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes shone. "Not bad, not bad. This is a great idea. Then, let us go." Shangguan Lingxiu laughed and said, "All right." Just as they were about to move, Yin Yang suddenly frowned and stared at the path in front of him. "Two old friends have come. I wondered if it's a coincidence or not." "Old friends? Who?" Yin Yang smiled but did not answer. At the foot of the mountain, Wei Xinglu and Gugu, both senior and junior siblings, who had not seen each other for a long time, were walking at a steady pace towards them. As they walked, Wei Xinglu was still talking. "Gugu, people like Supreme Cloud are not people you can meet just because you want to. If you don't see him this time, it's probably fate. You don't have to be discouraged." Gugu's calm voice said, "I've never been discouraged. I just want to verify the prophecy that Heaven's Inquisitor gave me that day. If I really see him, I'll only ask him if he still remembers me. If I don't see him, everything will go with the wind." Wei Xinglu sighed and said, "You're the leader of our sect now. To suddenly leave the mountain gate just because of a prophecy in the past. I don't have the confidence." Gugu rolled her eyes and said, "It's just a long trip. What's the big deal?" Both of them were talking as they flew over. The two big trees that had just passed by suddenly stopped in their tracks. Both of them looked over in disbelief with their eyes wide open. Under the tree, Yin Yang was dressed in a purple robe, looking at both of them with kind eyes. He was still as handsome and elegant as he was back then. It was such a familiar yet long-lost feeling. Both of them were stunned, rooted to the ground. Supreme Cloud. Old friends reunited today. Both of them were overjoyed. After the initial shock, Wei Xinglu and Gugu quickly regained their composure and began to talk and laugh naturally. "I can't believe that the little girl from back then has actually become the leader of a sect today. Congratulations." Yin Yang teased. Gugu was furious. "Why can't I become the leader of a sect? What has the little girl done to you?" "I'm just saying. Why are you like a cat with its fur standing on end? You're still the same as before, the shrewdness and magnanimity that a leader should have." Yin Yang was speechless. "You can't just say it like that. It's fake to be my sect's leader. You're profaning our sect, do you know that?" Gugu was as fierce as ever. All right, I've misspoken. Sect leader is magnanimous, please don't blame me." Yin Yang raised his hands in surrender. "Then, let's drink and reminisce about the old days." Can I punish myself by drinking 3 cups to compensate for my crime? Reminisce about the old days by drinking? Are you trying to force a girl to drink? Gugu said fiercely, but she laughed and said, drink less then, just for the sake of it. Huh, everyone burst into laughter. Right, I still don't know what's your name, sect leader. Don't tell me you're called Gugu. Even if you know my name, in your heart, I'm still Gugu. Gugu said, why do you want to know? Huh. That's true. It's you and I who are friends, not who we are. Names are indeed not important. The 4 of them sat facing each other. Yin Yang took out a few dishes from his space and drank with them. In such a beautiful place, it was a different kind of flavor for friends to drink and reminisce about the old days. The few of them talked about their respective encounters after they had parted. Yin Yang played the role of a loyal listener. Gugu drank in big mouthfuls. She was in high spirits, acting bolder than a man. It was a pity that she could not hold her liquor. Not long after, her eyes became blurry. She looked at Yin Yang for a while, her lips moved as if she wanted to say something. However, after looking at Shangguan Lingxiu, she did not say anything in the end. Not long after, Gugu was completely drunk. She fell into Wei Xinglu's arms, unconscious. Wei Xinglu smiled bitterly, junior sister is drunk. If Lord Supreme Cloud has no other instructions, we shall take our leave now. Yin Yang kept quiet for a while and said, I don't know when we'll meet again after this farewell. Before we leave, I have a gift for you. I hope that my brother will not reject it. Wei Xinglu was very understanding and said in a low voice, all right, I'll pass it to Gugu. He understood very well that this was not a gift for him. This was the compensation that Yin Yang had made for a certain deception back then. However, Wei Xinglu still chose to accept it on behalf of Gugu. Yin Yang took a look at Wei Xinglu and cupped his hands together. Brother Wei, take care. I hope that one day, we can meet again in the bound of universe. We were friends back then, and today, we are still as warm as before. Take care, we shall meet again. Wei Xinglu glanced at the junior sister in his arms and sighed in his heart, saying, take care, I hope that we shall meet again. Yin Yang smiled. With a wave of his hand, a space crack suddenly appeared. He held Shangguan Lingxiu's hand and stepped into it, disappearing immediately. Gugu, who was in Wei Xinglu's arms, opened her eyes abruptly. 2 lines of tears rolled down. Didn't you say you wanted to ask him? Why didn't you? Why should I ask? Wei Xinglu sighed. Gugu said coldly, back then, his original intention was just to use us, wasn't it? Wei Xinglu let out another long sigh. When 2 countries were at war, life and death, what was there to say at that time? He passed the space ring over, this is the gift he left for you. You shouldn't have accepted it. Gugu's eyes were red. Wei Xinglu naturally knew that he should not have accepted it, but he still accepted it. Gugu opened the space ring and saw that there were 4 bottles of medicinal pills inside. Each bottle of medicinal pills had a detailed method of consumption, effects, taboos, and so on written on it. The 4 bottles of medicinal pills had different effects. One bottle's effect was to enhance one's cultivation base. Consuming 1 pill could enhance one's cultivation base by 50 years. There were as many as 100 pills in 1 bottle. The effect of this bottle was to enhance one's soul, and there were also 100 pills. Chapter 1438. When Old Qin and the other ghosts left Tianxian, Yin Yang asked Old Qin, intentionally or unintentionally, do you want to live or die? Want to live or die? When this question was asked, an ordinary person's first reaction would be to say that he wanted to live, but Old Qin misunderstood Yin Yang's meaning. I only want to die, to be free from this world. All right. Yin Yang did not say much and crushed it without hesitation. If Old Qin said that he wanted to live, Yin Yang would bring them to the bound of universe. In the bound of universe, Old Qin's ability might not be able to do anything. The residents of Nine Supremes had always been inclusive and did not discriminate against ghostly cultivators. Old Sheen and the other spirits were unique existences after all. It was not necessary for Yun Yang to annihilate them with their bizarre assistance. However, Old Sheen had obviously misunderstood. He thought that Yun Yang's so-called survival was to bear the burning of the mystical flame all the time, so naturally, he was willing to die. He did not know that the burning of the soul by the mystical flame was nothing to Yun Yang, but what repaired his soul was the spiritual energy of vitality. This was also because Yun Yang had Emmy, a cheat. Others like Dongfang Haoran would only use the spiritual energy of vitality in other places even if they had such a treasure. They would not be as wasteful as Yun Yang. Yun Yang's usage was seen by those with a discerning eye. Aside from the pain, it was normal for them to attack Yun Yang. However, Yun Yang was not in the mood to explain further. He crushed it without a second thought. It was just a fleeting thought. It's fine if you come, it's fine if you don't. It's New Year's Eve anyway. I'll celebrate the new year with you or without you. It's still a pity. Shangguan Lingxiu watched Yun Yang dispose of the few phantoms and said with slight regret, such a complete state, a soul that has been cultivating for tens of thousands of years, is one of a kind, even in the bound of universe. His foundation is no less than that of the demon soul. My original intention in asking this question was indeed because of this soul energy. However, they lost this opportunity on their own, so it has nothing to do with anyone else. I've never said that I'm not angry at the things they did in the profound sky continent. Yin Yang said calmly, since I've lost the opportunity, I might as well use it to vent my anger and end the karma in another way. Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but chuckle. This old fellow doesn't want to die either. He's just afraid of being tormented by you. How would he know that there's a chance of survival now? Forget it. What's done is done. His death is not to be regretted. On his way back, Yin Yang did not deliberately hasten his pace, but he could vaguely feel that the barrier of the Saint Realm in front of him was growing thinner and thinner, almost as if it had disappeared. It was a feeling that even if he didn't work hard to break through, he could still break through on his own. It was a subtle feeling that was real. Yin Yang enjoyed the feeling very much. So he wasn't in a hurry to break through instead, and he instead devoted himself to comprehending his current cultivation realm. During this process of breaking through, he'd completely understood every single detail of the process, causing his mental state to undergo a transformation as if he'd been reborn. So this is the truth behind the path of the Saint Realm. The moment he stepped foot on the bound of universe once more, Yin Yang felt as if he had been reborn. It was as if he was bathing in an extremely mystical and relaxed atmosphere. A refreshing feeling surged up from his chest, and he could not help wanting to howl into the sky and let loose a long howl. The howl was so loud that the wind and clouds shifted and the heaven and earth moved. Yin Yang's aura swept across 30,000 miles in an instant. All the living beings in the bound of universe felt their hearts skip a beat, feeling a sense of peace and serenity in them. Is this, another saint has achieved greatness? Countless humans rejoiced. Another saint had been born, and the bound of universe had another pillar that could hold up the heavens. It was much more stable now. In the depths of the East Celestial Palace, Dongfang Haoran, who was in closed-door cultivation, opened his eyes abruptly. Stars seemed to be swirling in his eyes, glowing brightly as he said, "Good lad. You've broken through so quickly." He stopped his closed-door cultivation and asked through voice transmission, "How's the Supreme Heaven Pavilion now?" Someone replied immediately, "The Supreme Heaven Pavilion has begun to send out the light of selection." What's the situation with the demon race now? How's the civil war? Is there a limit to the war's expansion? The demon race's civil war is still in a stalemate. The Fox Sovereign and the Cat Sovereign don't seem to have the intention to expand the war and are mostly defending themselves. The Demon Sovereign doesn't seem to have the intention to quell the rebellion in one fell swoop, so both sides are still in the stalemate. The Fox Sovereign's and the Cat Sovereign's forces are still limited to the Fox clan's original territory. Although the other clans are mobilizing their troops, their destination is unclear. Perhaps they're going to quell the rebellion, but it's more likely that they're going to the Blood Soul Mouth. After all, the main force of the Blood Soul Mouth's gatekeepers are mostly from the Fox clan. Now that the Fox clan is in a state of full preparation for war, the Blood Soul Mouth will naturally have many openings. Add another 5 demigods to the Blood Soul Mouth. Be wary of the demon race taking advantage of the situation. Don't be careless. Yes. Palace Lord, will these people be sent by the East Celestial Palace? What time is there to care about which celestial palace? Go. Yes. In the next moment, Dongfang Haoran's figure turned incorporeal as he disappeared from the palace where he was cultivating in seclusion. In the blink of an eye, he had already appeared in the West Heaven Holy Palace, in Shiman Fafu's seclusion chamber. The moment he appeared, he heard Shiman Fafu instructing the West Heaven Holy Palace's experts to reinforce the Blood Soul Mountain. Seeing Dongfang Haoran's arrival, he could not help but laugh. You old man, you also felt it? Of course I felt the birth of a saint. It would be strange if I didn't feel it. Dongfang Haoran said, now, it's about time. How is it about time? There are still 2 more than half of it. Shiman Fafu said, the original words left by our ancestor were, when 3 saints appear, the world will be at peace. Now, only Yun Yang alone has become a saint. I think it's still too early. I can tell you responsibly that the day of ancestors' prophecy is coming soon. Dongfang Haoran said, I've come to discuss the matter of all the experts of the 3 heavenly palaces coming out of the Blood Soul Mouth. Shiman Fafu frowned and said, I don't dare to be as optimistic as you. Forget it, let's go to Northern Heaven to talk. This matter can't be left out of Old Man Beigong. The 2 rulers stood up at the same time and disappeared from the West Heaven Holy Palace in a flash of starlight. On the road. Dongfang Haoran deliberately slowed down his footsteps. How is it? He was a saint of a generation, the face of a ruler, but at this moment, there was actually a hint of winking between his brows. His original sage-like and otherworldly image disappeared without a trace. Shiman Fafu's old face was dyed red. Cough, I'm pregnant. Cough, cough, cough. Dongfang Haoran laughed. Didn't I want to kill you? Why did it suddenly happen? Speaking of this, Shiman Fanfu suddenly became elated and said proudly, I finally understand now. No matter how unreasonable these women are, as long as we, the head of the family, are strong, there is nothing we can't subdue. This old man only needs to slap them twice and then give them a round of punches and kicks, and they will be subdued in no time. Dongfang Haoran laughed. If you say this to other people, they might believe it, but if you say it to me, ha 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 ha, even if I go to the next life, this old man won't believe it. Shiman Fafu's face turned red as he argued, this is the truth. Then he quickly changed the topic, what about you? Me? Dongfang Haoran snorted twice, I'm pregnant with 2. Fuck. Shiman Fafu was a bit unhappy, why do you only have 2? Dongfang Haoran glanced at him, I have 7 wives, how many do you have? Shiman Fafu instantly lost his temper, aren't mine, Dongfang Haoran said, a coward is a coward, what use is there in saying that? Shiman Fafu flew into a rage, what did you say? I said you're a coward, so what? Isn't that the truth? Shiman Fafu's chest was filled with anger, but he couldn't do anything. He just continued on his way, not saying another word. Tell me, I'm very interested. Tell me my ass. Shiman Fafu said, Father used the immortal execution sacred water, that's why, ahahaha. Dongfang Haoran held his stomach, laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. You're really awesome, old man Shiman. Father must be convinced by you today. I can't not be convinced, I can't not be convinced. Shiman Fafu's face was filled with black lines, but there was a trace of pride mixed in. It took an entire 2.5 months, until there was a reaction. This old man undid the restriction. Humph, women will always be women. Once they have a child, they've already thrown us men to the side. Not fighting anymore? Not fighting anymore. That wife of mine isn't an unreasonable person, it's just that the pain of losing her son has damaged her soul. Now that she has someone to rely on, she naturally regained her rationality. Ha, 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 the two of them arrived at the northern desolate demonic palace with proud expressions. They heard Baigong Lioli's loud laughter. Not bad, not bad. The two of them asked together, what's not bad? Baigong Lioli laughed so hard his beard trembled. Today, this old man has one more. What? Out of this old man's wives and concubines, there have already been 7 people who have good news. Today, there's one more, of course it's not bad. Hearing this, Dongfang Haoran and Shiman Fafu felt their pride suffer a heavy blow. They said with dark expressions, You didn't waste a single bit. Even if it wasn't wasted, this old man only has 3 left. Baigong Lioli had a face full of joy, but there was a tinge of regret. It's a pity this old man has too many wives. These 8 are pregnant and the other 20 are all red-eyed, wanting a share, but this old man only has 3 strands of life energy left. There aren't enough to go around. How could there be enough? You two came at the right time. Quickly give the ones that haven't been used to this old man so this old man can make the best use of them. Dongfang Haoran and Shiman Fafu both had serious expressions. No. There isn't even one left. No way. Baigong Lioli's eyes widened. Why did you use them so quickly? Dongfang Haoran said with a dark expression, if you don't have any left, you should go to Yunyang. Why are you looking for us? We're here for serious business today. Who has the time to play with you? Let's get down to business. I don't want to talk to this old stud anymore. It's too much of a blow. Baigong Lioli said casually, it's about time indeed. I know, how can I not know when the Supreme Heaven Pavilion glows? The 3 of them entered Baigong Lioli's study. Let's discuss this. The border of the bound of universe. You've broken through? Shangguan Lingxiu was overjoyed. Yes, I have. Yin Yang smiled and said, Sister Lingxiu, please go to the Palace of 9 Supremes and see the changes. Also, tell everyone about it. You and Lingxi have to cultivate faster as well. If I'm not mistaken, the ultimate war between the 2 sides is about to begin. Shangguan Lingxiu said, all right. I'll go back now. Right, you're not going back? I do have something to do. I won't go back for now, Yin Yang said in a low voice. All right. Shangguan Lingxiu did not ask further about Yin Yang's whereabouts. Instead, she stood up and left in a rainbow. As Yin Yang watched Shangguan Lingxiu leave, he tore the space apart and went to God's grave. Their return to the bound of universe this time was also through this node. However, with Shangguan Lingxiu by their side and his cultivation base on the verge of a breakthrough, they did not return the god's bones right away. Yin Yang was worried about the promise he had made back then. Of course, it would take a lot of effort to fulfill the promise, but after returning all the god's bones, the gods and demons would definitely be revived or other variables would appear. He might not be able to take care of Shangguan Lingxiu then. Now that Shangguan Lingxiu had left and Yin Yang possessed the cultivation base of a saint, he no longer had to worry. Naturally, he felt more confident. Even if the deity's heart is treacherous and has ulterior motives, I'm not afraid. Besides, everything is still up in the air. Yin Yang opened the god's grave, his eyes filled with warmth as he stepped in. As soon as he entered, the desolate land immediately changed. Countless phantoms and many semi-corporeal phantoms appeared. Young friend, you're here again. Young friend, your cultivation base has improved again. You're like a different person compared to before. You're truly a generous person. I wonder why you're here again this time. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. Yin Yang did not waste his breath. He took out his spatial ring and poured all the god's bones he had stored in it onto the ground, taking out the weapons as well. At the same time, he looked around. Unsurprisingly, he saw that there was a weapon placed near many of the skeletons in God's grave. Many gods' bones suddenly appeared in the god's grave. In an instant, there was a whirling air current. Then, the god's bones on the ground floated in midair. It was a spectacular sight. Yin-Yang immediately sensed that the countless phantoms and even the semi-tangible ones were all staring intently at the god's bones. Only the elder who sat in the center did not show any urgency. He bowed deeply at Yin-Yang and said, "Young friend, you're a man of your word. If this is done, this old man thanks you for your kindness on behalf of the god's grave's remnant souls." The other phantoms came to their senses at once and stopped their restlessness. They bowed in unison and said, "Thank you, young friend, for your kindness. We were too distracted and have been impolite." "You're welcome." Yin-Yang was not offended. "Let's see if anything is missing. Heaven and earth are not complete. We really don't expect to retrieve all the gods' bones that have been left behind. Young friend, you've already retrieved more than 90% of the gods' bones. If we were to ask for more, we wouldn't be worthy of being human beings." The elder looked emotional. "Besides, as long as we have these, we can retrieve the rest ourselves. Then there's nothing else for me to do. I won't disturb you any longer." Yin-Yang said, "It's been a long time since we've seen each other physically. Now is the time of great joy. I shall take my leave now." Before he could finish, the elder shook his head and said, "Hold on, young friend. You've done us such a great favor. If you leave just like this, how can we still live in this world? Please, young friend, stay a little longer." Immediately after, the old man ordered, "Return to your positions." Feng Lingtian said, "My wife didn't let me go to Beijing to study. She asked me to find one locally. There's only one technical college in Laiwu. I said, it's not appropriate for a man like me to visit a brothel. Then I got beaten up, beaten up, beaten up." Chapter 1439. The order was given. All the gods' bones glowed brightly in the air as if they had received the order. Yin-Yang focused his gaze and saw that countless gods' bones were glowing with a white light. Countless specks of light were scattered on the piles of bones on the ground. A moment later, the many skeletons seemed to respond with specks of white light as they rose from the ground. As far as Yin-Yang could see, the immortal golden-armored warriors stood up from the ground as if they had been created out of thin air. Their limbs were complete, their facial features distinct, and every pair of eyes that looked at him were filled with gratitude. More and more stood up. 10, 100, 1,000, thousands, tens of thousands. As he watched, Yin-Yang was stunned. "Kill them all. I've brought back quite a number of gods' bones, but not this many. How could this be?" More and more people stood up. It was no longer limited to the godly generals in golden armor. There were elders in loose robes, scholars in white, burly men with dark faces and round eyebrows, as well as countless graceful fairies, celestial children, jade maidens, and mythical beasts. The world that had been dead and silent was coming alive bit by bit before Yin-Yang's eyes. Even the land beneath his feet was no longer lifeless. Instead, it was filled with jade herbs and celestial flowers. Jade palaces, and palaces that connected the heavens could be seen in the distance. Immortal fog lingered and white clouds drifted leisurely. Yes, this was a world of immortals that only existed in legends. Yin-Yang's eyes were fixed on a seedling that had just sprouted beneath his feet. There was a glistening, seven-colored fruit hanging from it, glowing brightly. It was the spiritual herb, the moonlight vermilion fruit. It was a moonlight vermilion fruit that was more than 70,000 years old. Only a moonlight vermilion fruit that was more than 70,000 years old could produce a fruit with 7 colors. A 70,000-year-old heavenly treasure, and it was a top-grade heavenly treasure that did not belong to the human world. It was simply too shocking. No, there shouldn't be any shock. Because in this place, it was simply everywhere, everywhere. Instinctively, Yin-Yang sucked in a deep breath, feeling the flesh and blood of his entire body rejoicing and his cultivation base stirring in anticipation. Gradually, on the other side of the clouds, countless people seemed to have flown over from the edge of the sky, lining up in front of Yun Yang. Then, all of them bowed to the ground in unison. We express our gratitude to you. Thank you, young friend Yun Yang, for your kindness. We will never forget it. Yun Yang heaved a soft sigh of relief and said softly, everyone, you are too courteous. I have been entrusted with a task, so I do not deserve such gratitude. To me, it's just a slight effort. 99% of it is due to fate and not intentional. Everyone's actions have instead made me afraid. There's no need to be overly courteous. Please stay, stay. Although that was what he said, he still stood there steadily and accepted everyone's salute. Yun Yang's cultivation base had advanced to the level of a saint. His knowledge and experience had broadened as well, allowing him to understand the significance of the return of God's bones and the return of the gods to their rightful places at a deeper level. No matter how simple the matter was, it was still an indescribable favor to the gods before him. If he didn't accept this bow, the gods would never be able to completely repay this karma. The other gods were at the forefront. The elder who led them had already changed into a regal attire. His gaze on Yun Yang was filled with approval and approval. He understood the deeper meaning behind Yun Yang's acceptance of the bow. To Yun Yang, if he had avoided the bow or returned it, the others would have felt better, but the favor could not be erased. On the other hand, Yun Yang stood there and accepted the bow. In terms of cause and effect, this matter ends here. I accept your gratitude. I've been entrusted with a task, and I've fulfilled my promise. My gratitude is sufficient. This was not arrogance, nor was it putting on airs. On the contrary, it was a display of great kindness and kindness, an expression of the wish to treat each other as equals. Only by smoothing out the past and treating everyone as equals from the bottom of his heart would he need to do so. After this, he wanted to be friends with everyone. He didn't need everyone to see him as a benefactor. Not only was this gesture sincere, it was also solemn. Young friend, after today, our fallen celestial court will leave this place of confinement and return to heaven. This old man doesn't mean that we'll never meet again. Instead, I'll definitely come to play and chat with you when I'm free. We hope very much that we can become best friends in the future. It'd be even better if we're brothers. Yun Yang had intended to say this, but the emperor of the celestial court before him had said it first. In spite of this, the meaning behind his words was extraordinary. It was also a display of great kindness, and it was also a way to return a favor. As the saying goes, to return a plum with a peach, words were irrelevant. Only actions would be meaningful. Yun Yang is more than happy to do so. Yun Yang smiled warmly. We'll stay here for another day to recall the gods' bones that are out there, and then we'll leave. Little friend, as a small repayment for what you've done, you can take everything in the divine court as long as you take a liking to it. The entire celestial court is at your disposal, young friend, and you can have whatever you want. After today, the celestial court will no longer exist. It's not difficult for us to find you, young friend, but it'll be rather difficult for you to find us. Haha. Yun Yang smiled faintly. We're friends. It's not nice if we talk about repayment and so on. I don't have any interest in worldly things here. Let's wait for the future, when you're free, to come and have a cup of tea with me. That'll be the best repayment for me. Ha 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 ha. The few authoritative figures of the celestial court laughed in unison, obviously appreciating Yun Yang more and more. Since young friend insists on not taking it, this old man shall represent the brothers to give you a little souvenir. The leading elder handed over a spatial ring and said, this is just a small token between friends. If young friend refuses even this, then you'll be looking down on me. Yun Yang laughed and accepted the ring solemnly, saying, how can this young brother not accept a gift from my brother? Greedy, greedy. Both parties conversed for a while. Yun Yang knew that the elder seemed to have recovered completely, but he had only just recovered. There were many things to do and he still had to work on retrieving the missing god's bones, so he bade farewell. The elder did not urge him to stay, sending Yun Yang to the entrance of the road before saying, "Young friend, take care when you go back. We have plenty of time in the future." Right, the celestial court has been duplicated, but the order of heaven and earth hasn't been restored yet. It's because the ghost court was completely destroyed back then, even worse than the celestial court. It needs a fated person to rebuild it. Young friend, you're someone with the greatest providence in this world. It's fine if you're fated to lend a hand. Helping out is a form of good karma. Then, he bowed solemnly and waved goodbye. Yin Yang, who had made a promise and gained another karma, exited the celestial court. When he turned to look again, the air was filled with swirling mist. Then, the celestial court disappeared completely, even more untraceable than before. Yin Yang had long expected the celestial court's disappearance, so he did not think much of it. Instead, he was thinking about the elder's last words. Ghost court? It needs a fated person to rebuild it? Also, am I someone with the greatest providence in this world? Does this world refer to the Tianxian continent or the bound of universe as well? Why did the elder's tone sound so certain, as if he thought that Yun Yang would definitely meet the so-called fated person? Then, who is the fated person? I have indeed met quite a number of people and sects related to spirits and spirits, such as the God's Mausoleum's remnant soul, the world-wrecking soul demon, the 10,000-year-old soul head that has just been annihilated, and the bound of universe's cannon fodder, the Thousand Ghosts sect. These can all be classified as the underworld system. However, the God's Mausoleum's remnant soul and spiritual bones have been reconstructed, and the soul demon and old soul head Qin have already perished in my hands. It seems that none of these have anything to do with the ghost court. The most similar to the ghost court would probably be Tianxuan's old friends, the concourse of the underworld. Back then, after the concourse of the underworld entered the haunting temple, there was no news of them. Until now, there was still no news of them. When Yun Yang came back to Tianxian this time, he had used his deific consciousness to search for information about them in his free time, but it was to no avail. Could it be that they were actually rebuilding the ghost court? Yin Yang immediately thought of their self-proclaimed names, the 10 court kings, Xidigarba, and the black and white impermanents. It might really be them. The so-called haunting temple might be the underworld's underworld. If that was the case, then it was all the more reason for him to lend them a hand. Throughout the entire Tianxian continent, when it came to the origin of friendship, the concourse of the underworld and the 9 supremes were the ones who had many inseparable ties. Without stopping, Yin Yang took out the spatial ring given by the elder and opened it to take a look. He was stunned on the spot. Since Yin Yang's debut, he had had many fortuitous encounters and the wealth he had accumulated was shocking. There were few people in this world who could compare to him, and there was almost nothing in this world that could stun him at first glance. However, when he saw what was inside the ring, his heart could not help but skip a beat as he stood rooted to the ground. What shocked Yun Yang was the spatial ring itself. Yin Yang was known as the 9-feet-high sky swallows plucking feathers from passing them, and the spatial ring was a must-have for any cultivator in the bound of universe when traveling and cultivating. Therefore, Yin Yang had owned countless spatial rings. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were uncountable, but this was the first time he had seen such a unique spatial ring. Not only was the internal space of this spatial ring ridiculously large, almost boundless, but it was also automatically divided into 9 layers, dividing the internal space into 10 areas. Each space had its own unique category of items. The first space, 50,000 years of various heaven and earth resources, 1 million portions. The second space, 80,000 years of heaven and earth resources, 500,000 portions. The third space, 100,000 years of heaven and earth resources, 100,000 portions. The fourth space, 100,000 years of heaven and earth resources, 100,000 portions. The fifth space, 200,000 years of heaven and earth resources, 3,000 portions. The sixth space, 500,000 years of heaven and earth resources, 3,000 portions. The above spaces contained heaven and earth resources, and not only did they have the ability to store them, they also had the ability to nurture them. The spaces were embedded with nurturing formations that could absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth on their own, so that the heaven and earth resources could always be maintained in the best and most perfect state. This alone was enough to make Yun-Yang gasp in amazement. Yun-Yang had Emmy in a deific consciousness space, so he should not be praising this function. However, most of the advantages of a spatial ring lay in its capacity and storage. Time seemed to stop, but there would always be a certain amount of wear and tear to the heaven and earth resources stored within. There were very few spatial rings that came with the ability to keep things fresh forever. However, this spatial ring had done it. This alone could already be classified as a rare treasure. The seventh space of the spatial ring was filled with books. There were more than a dozen large bookshelves, and on them were alchemy techniques, cultivation techniques, all kinds of martial arts techniques, spells, magical powers, and strange abilities. There was everything one could think of, from the lowest to the highest level. The eighth space after that contained countless rare metals and metals, even the heart of a planet. The number was huge and the variety was so complete that Yun-Yang felt that he was actually not that rich. After looking through the 8 spaces, Yun-Yang could not wait to look at the 9th space, but he was greatly disappointed. It was because there were all sorts of treasured sabers, swords, and other weapons, a total of 10,000 of them. It was a pity that their quality was only of superb quality, so much worse than what Emmy had produced. Naturally, they did not catch Yun-Yang's attention, which made him regain a lot of confidence. After looking through the contents of the last space, Yun-Yang felt a little dizzy again. There was nothing in the last space, only a piece of paper with only one sentence written on it: "If there's a command, I'll die for it." Beneath the words was a dazzling golden mark, as well as a flamboyant signature that one couldn't tell what it was. "It's too heavy. This gift of gratitude is too heavy." Even with Yun-Yang's vast experience, he could not help feeling shaken when he saw the items in the spatial ring. It had to be said that the gift of gratitude was indeed heavy, especially the sincerity that was expressed in it. Putting aside the treasures of heaven and earth, any one of them, even those of the lowest grade, would be priceless and rare in the bound of universe. The weapons that contained celestial power at the end, other than being incomparable to the psychic weapons that Emmy had made, were also rare divine weapons of the highest grade that were hard to come by. There was also the letter of commitment that was stamped with the Celestial Emperor's seal. As if a seal was not enough, the Celestial Emperor's personal signature had been added. This was the embodiment of sincerity. Perhaps Yun-Yang might not be able to use this favor in this lifetime, but it was indeed the most important thing to him. "If I'd really asked for it, our fate would have ended here. Even if we were to meet again in the future, it'd only be based on benefits and not on friendship. Luckily, I didn't ask for it." Yun-Yang stroked his chin and snorted inwardly. "If I'd taken it myself, it wouldn't have been as much as these. I'm someone who cares about my reputation as well. How can I take it seriously? Indeed, the honest are blessed, and the virtuous will be rewarded." Emmy could not help but vomit in the space. "You have the nerve to call yourself someone who cares about his reputation? Honest man? Virtuous? Sigh, I'm just a plant, but I can't help but throw up." However, as Yun-Yang moved all the treasured gems in the ring into his deific consciousness space, Emmy could no longer care about vomiting. It was so excited that it was incoherent, almost fainting as tears of joy rolled down its cheeks. There were too many. Too high-end. Too classy. Too satisfied. After Emmy recovered from its excitement, it opened up another 10,000 acres of herb garden at once, instructing its little elves to mix all the spiritual plants from the realm of God with the spiritual herbs from before. It was a humongous project. However, Emmy's deific consciousness had already controlled every corner of the deific consciousness space. It stared fixedly at it, not allowing any mistakes to be made. The task was obviously not something that could be completed in a short amount of time. Yun-Yang could only leave it be after he moved it in, but the little elves inside would probably lose a size or even 2 sizes under Emmy's control this time, although he was no longer paying attention and was only waiting, Yun-Yang could still feel that the spiritual qi in his deific consciousness space had increased by a few levels since these newly acquired spiritual herbs had entered his deific consciousness space. In addition, it was still increasing. Obviously, there was still a lot of room for improvement. This was probably because Emmy had just started taking action and had yet to handle it properly. When everything was settled and everything was thriving, Yun-Yang believed that there would be even greater changes by then. Perhaps, it would be a possibility of a quantitative change leading to a qualitative change. Even so, as the high-quality spiritual qi from the deific consciousness space seeped into his body bit by bit, Yun-Yang could still feel his cultivation base growing. Even if he was just sitting still and did not cultivate, this transaction is worth it, I've profited greatly. It was at this moment, somewhere far away, a loud rumble came suddenly, as if the earth was splitting and the sky was collapsing, shaking heaven and earth. Yin-Yang looked towards the source of the sound and was shocked to see that the hundreds of mountains in the barren land had all disappeared, leaving only a huge, bottomless hole on the ground where they once stood. Within this hole, there was an endless amount of black qi that surged into the sky, gradually filling up the firmament. In just a moment, the place was filled with eerie winds and ghostly qi. The entire bound of universe, including the demon race, was shaken to an unprecedented degree. Dongfang Haoran and the others who were discussing on the other side felt shaken at the same time, as if something uncontrollable and irresistible, yet closely related, had happened in this world. The three juggernauts were unwilling to be slow. They moved in unison, tearing through the space to rush to the location of the incident, only to see the huge, pitch-black hole slowly calming down. In the end, it turned into a flat ground that was no different from before. The black hole had disappeared. However, the eerie and ghostly qi did not dissipate. Instead, it swirled and gathered in the air, turning into a pitch-black stone tablet. There were a few words written on the stone tablet. From today onwards, Sun Luo stands. Feng Lingtian said. Actually, I want to drag it out, but this book seems to know that I want to drag it out. They're stubbornly advancing according to the original plot. It seems like I can't drag it out any longer from the end of the book. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.